we'll take a look at Peter Boghossian's, looks like he did a talk for the National Progress Alliance. Big kind of thing is conversation in the street epistemology. Um, and his big idea, or the thing he's trying to put forward, is the idea of like this, I think he's calling street epistemology or spectrum street epistemology, which he describes as rooted in the Socratic method. SSE helps individuals reflect on their reasoning while learning to productively engage those who may disagree. SSE is a non-confrontational way to thoughtfully engage ideas. Um, Again, what we should make sure to put into is that this is not a revolutionary kind of idea. Things like this have existed for a while. This is the same kind of conflict resolution kind of design that you find in a lot of, some of it might be psychology, some of it might be just kind of general therapy. Just kind of across the board, you would have uh, these kind of little games that you can play, or uh, establishing constructed classroom setting experiments to create an environment that isn't open to discussion. That is, it's not bad, but again, anybody who thinks that this is revolutionary, you should probably take a step back and realize it's not particularly amazing. Again, this isn't to knock it. It's a fun little idea that he does. Is oftentimes what he does is he puts stuff on the street and he asks some kind of political and or philosophically charged question, oftentimes with some degree of morality attached to it or something like that. That's testing values. And you have the spectrum of strongly agree, strongly disagree, and then you argue your point back and forth. Basically, it's just an ad hoc, strongly agree, strongly disagree, then kind of debate. That's his overall setup. And calling it street epistemology, I think, is just a bit of marketing. It's fun, I guess, but this idea that it is going to be um, giving a productive and thoughtful engage of ideas, I am, again, it is only as productive and thoughtful as the originators of them. Again, it provides an environment for that, but again, the participants themselves are who they are. Like there is no mechanism for education, learning, or anything like that. And again, this whole Socratic method with questioning things. Again, the Socratic method is a nice way of going about developing ideas and interrogating ideas and doing critique. It's not the only way, though. A lot of pseudo intellectualism, anti intellectualism, currently, not saying that Peter Boghossian is one of these, but he might be, because sadly I'm seeing some evidence of this. But one of the things that they do is they like to appeal to this noble and infinitely wise past that we must get back to. And they like to use figures that everybody will agree with are, they're nice, safe political philosophers, moral philosophers that everyone, but especially conservative minds, kind of respect and like, mostly because it's all in the past and they don't really know too much about them. But they're just like, they're like, again, figures like Socrates, Aristotle, really old enough that we just don't give a shit. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into this and see how this goes.
Thank you. Stellar is absolutely correct. We invited the folks from Genspect, to Genspect from WPATH. As you know, it's right across the street. And I think it's like 800 meters away, so it's in the same city at the same time. And the goal of inviting them was not to make an argument, was not to have a conflict, was not to get clicks or to get views, but it was to see if there could be some mutual understanding. What do you believe and why do you believe it?
All right. So as we do, we take this basically statement at a time. is I am always immediately suspicious anytime somebody says, well, we're inviting somebody to talk and we're not doing this to fight or anything like that. We just want to have a conversation, dot, 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 dot. That can be somewhat true, and I have no doubt that there's a degree in Boghossian's mind that might believe that is true, but it also is incredibly naive and or deceptive, both, on both degrees, because if you're inviting these and you want and they know it's kind of like this, oh, Ben Shapiro, he just wants to sit down and have a talk. It's like, well, yeah, but people know your past, Ben. People know that you are a debate lord. People know that you belong to, in many ways, the opposite side. And there has been many arrows slung and many rocks thrown and many things have been happening. So this whole idea, let's just get together and just have this nice conversation. Oh, they didn't want to come or anything like this. Again, I don't know where this is going, but again, anytime the setup starts like that, it's just kind of like, look, if you can't admit or otherwise acknowledge that your side is equally as volatile, harassing, nasty, ugly, whatever, as the opposition, or that the opposition does not have a fair and reasonable reason why they might not to, again, this idea that there should always be this, no matter what, pure freedom of speech and everyone should be allowed to talk to anybody all the time and you should be open to this. It is one, just naive and just kind of, it's such a privileged position of there's no fallout from anything that I say. Well, maybe they experienced a great deal of fallout from the last time they conversed with you. And maybe for you, because you're allowed to, through your privilege, whatever it may be, you're allowed to say and engage in this war, this game. And then like a game, you get to leave the field. You get to leave the football field and it's all fine and dandy. But maybe others didn't leave the field so nice. Maybe also others can't leave the field, so they're stuck with whatever awful war and nastiness that was left behind. You're able to just kind of jump in, jump out. Maybe for you it's a video game, but maybe for them it actually is their life. You get to jump in, do some war, do some carnage, do some questing, and then you leave when you're bored or tired or it's getting a little too stressful. Maybe for them, they have to live the rest of this. So this is it's a small thing, but I really, really dislike, I dislike whenever somebody tries to start off with this, I'm this perfect, wonderful centrist just trying to find things. It's not quite that way, but it does, again, maybe I'm being a little too harsh off the bat, so I'll pull it back a step. But I would want people to be aware that this is a trend that is pretty bog standard at this point for every single talker who absolutely talks all massive kinds of shit, and then when they're up front and they put on the mask of, oh, I'm just a fair and balanced person.
Make an argument was not to have a conflict, was not to get clicks or to get views, but it was to see if there could be some mutual understanding. What do you believe and why do you believe it? If you know something that we don't know, I want to know what it is. It's no surprise that they did not take us up on that offer.
Okay, it's no surprise they did not take us. So this is going exactly where I think it's going. And immediately this this is a mark against Peter Boghossian. For all of this talk of we want to get together and talk and understand, I want to know if you know something different. The issue is that, well, they probably actually have tried on multiple occasions to talk to you about this, but you aren't listening and you're at an impasse. So at this point, it's like, well, why would I continue talking? Like, you just don't agree, so I'm just not going to talk with you. Nothing more we can do. You refuse to acknowledge any of the things that we know that we're trying to pass on to you. That could be one thing. Secondary is this immediate implication. As we all know, they didn't take it up on this. They're trying to hide this immediate maligning of them. unless you immediately follow up this statement with like this, and I understand there's been a lot of contention, there's been a lot of issues, and a lot of harassment, and oftentimes, again, these people do not want to talk about it, not because they are wrong or because they're hiding something, but because they genuinely do believe these things, or they have evidence, and they have received untold and unfounded and undeserved harassment. The fact that you can't even, in good faith, perceive that the reason why someone doesn't want to have a fucking conversation with you is probably because having a conversation with you entails a hell of a lot more for them than it does for you. You get to walk away and not give a shit and turn a blind eye to where people who might follow you, people who might watch you, people who might side with you, aspects of your side will absolutely continue the fight. While you walk home and you go, wow, that was a great conversation. They're dealing with crowds and fucking tiki torches and burning, burning torches and, pitchforks. So again, automatically bad faith into interaction. And you might be saying, well, he's tried so many times. I'm going to be honest. I've watched a decent, I've kind of kept an eye on Peter Boghossian, the whole thing. And I'll be honest, their general reaching across the aisle has not been particularly productive or good. And in fact, a number of it, I would say even a good number of, like, look, you reach across the aisle now, but like 10 seconds ago, you reached across and slapped him across the face. Like, you can't be doing both at the same time. And again, imagining somebody being attacked by a crowd and people are reaching out their hands to put their hands on them, to claw at them, to slap them, to hit them. And then you reach out your hand to shake them, and then they bat it away. And you're like, oh, how dare you? It's like, I'm sorry. If you are not reading the room and understanding that this is fairly, there is a fairly aggressive conflict happening here. Again, getting pissy because you reached out poorly, or oftentimes, again, you didn't bother giving two rats shits about their actual ideology. Now all of a sudden you play the wounded scholar. It's bullshit. It's bullshit.
And that's extraordinarily unfortunate for all of us because it doesn't move the conversation forward.
Again, this has been a new tactic among right-leaning individuals, and I just like seeing it here, because this whole idea of it doesn't move the conversation forward. Okay, well, here's my big thing. If the this implies a desire for the conversation to move forward, for development, for the conversation to progress, and answers to be tested, resolved, either thrown away, changed, or accepted, and then we move on to new things, and we move on forward and forward. My big problem is that what they don't seem to have understood, and people like Boghossian sadly have become this way, is that this conversation has been had in academia with robust conflict for decades and decades and decades. And many times, and I'll even, again, I'm not even much of a gender ideology, whatever you would call that. We'll just call it I think what he usually is attacking some degree of like some mixture of queer theory, kind of the newer contemporary feminist theories that kind of are a mixture of things, and general like transgender ideology. Again, that seems to be the attack vector. And again, you jump in and you want to start at the very basics conversation that they've had, that they kind of were resolving or deciding, like 30 years ago. And honestly, more often than not, academics are okay with this, but but then you get upset and pissed off when they kind of tell you, okay, no, you're technically incorrect, because we've moved on beyond this. Like, well, hold on, how come you aren't proving it to me anymore? How come you aren't taking my arguments under consideration? It's like this, well, we did 30 years ago. 30 years ago, a lot of this shit was already being said, and we were already dealing with this. And it kind of resolved. It's like, again, some math person, again, a pseudo intellectual crank, who is interested in math and engineering, wants to talk about how going to space is utterly impossible because the physics just don't support it. It's like this. Look, that was like maybe like some argument or whatever that was might have been proposed back in the 1800s or some shit like that. Like, yeah, you can't generate enough thrust vector, or once you're up in there, you just float away and nothing comes back. It's like, yeah, but we've developed theories of like gravity. We understand how this works on those levels, and you can disagree, but at the same time, like you're kind of fucking wrong, and the conversation won't move forward because again, there's this awkward mismatch of somebody who is much farther down the road than you are, and while they're willing to walk back a little bit to talk to you, you keep wanting to go off on different paths, and it's like this. Well, that's nice. The problem is we covered that path. We actually did there. You can see the remnants here. I know you didn't read anything, and you haven't looked at the general history of this trail that has been blazed, but you see that faded little path in the grass. Yeah, see, that was it. We did this already. There are books written by people, or studies written by people, articles, theories that were published, or that we have a history of this, that follow exactly the line that you're thinking. And then people like Boghossian or somebody else might go, oh, so I was right. It's like, no, you weren't right. Not really. It ends up kind of in a dead end or an unanswerable question. So we kind of had to drop it because there wasn't much to be done with it. And our answer, the path we're walking on right now, covers all of the major issues that they want to discuss and continues forward and answers a greater, more theories and issues that we discuss. No, it doesn't answer everything, but again, that's the idea of like scientific advancement, is that a new theory takes hold and becomes the kind of standard theory when it can answer, for the most part, all of the previous questions or previous issues, as well as the older theory, but can answer newer and predict to a greater degree newer problems. So again, if you have an old theory, it can answer 10 issues. But we're found a 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th issue that the old theory or the older theory can't really answer particularly well. New theories developed that answers all the previous 10 issues, 10 problems that we had, and the new 5 ones, and the newer 5 ones, very easily, very simplicity, much more simply and with greater accuracy. And then it might even be able to answer or propose a couple of new interesting problems that it might solve, like the 16th, 17th, and 18th issues. Again, Peter Boghossian and many of them are starting out like problem 1 and then going, well, why isn't my theory great? It's like, well, yeah, your theory answers kind of in a way problem 1, 2, and 3, but it absolutely will fuck up on 4, 5, and 6. Well, 4, 5, and 6 aren't problems. You're just making this up. No, you just haven't gotten that far yet. Once you actually start thinking about it, you will get that far. So again, this whole we're so sad because the conversation isn't developing. Again, this is another weirdly privileged, self-centered my right to be able to go through this conversation transcends your right to just continue shit and develop it. You always have to come back and pick me up. And so it's like, well, maybe if you're a student, but if you're a student, you also are taking on the role that you don't know, you're learning from the expert, fucking deal with it. Once you have a bit more knowledge and you're actually caught up on some stuff, maybe you can bring up some issues. But again, a lot of this ends up being a bit of a, like a red herring. Like, this is what the problem is. It's like, no, it's not.
So I'm going to change the title of my talk. I spoke to just a little bit about this. This is a little bit of a last-minute thing. I'm going to attempt to make arguments better than they could. It's called steelmanning. I'm going to attempt to steelman their positions. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay a scholastic and epistemological infrastructure for the belief historically. I only have a half an hour, so I'll have to be very quick. And then I'm going to look at some claims that my friend Reed and I do. We go around the country and we do spectrum street epistemology. We're going to look at those claims in light of the infrastructure that I've discussed. And then what I would like to do is perhaps the most ambitious thing of all, is I would like to take questions from the audience, and I will pretend to be someone who actually believes what I'm talking about.
All right. So again, this is actually a fairly good exercise. It is also flawed to a certain degree. It's a good exercise to do, but it should be understood is that it's like the stepping into the other party's shoes, living a life in another party's shoes. It's a very wonderful to do, but it also should be understood is that you may not actually know what their shoes feel like, what their shoes are. You can only know what you have observed. So you have the outside aesthetic of this and general guesses, but you don't know. You're looking at the shoe and maybe it looks like a tennis shoe, but you don't know necessarily, is that leather that's been painted to look like kind of plastic, polyester, or is it polyester? What are the fabrics? You also don't know the size of their foot, so that when you step into their shoes, you're not stepping into their shoes, you're stepping into your shoes as you imagine them and their shoes. So the issue is that you're going to think and you're going to follow the logic that you have, not necessarily the logics that they have, and basically you can't know what you don't know. And that's the big thing that you need to be aware of, is that you don't know what you don't know. And that's a very important feature when you are trying to understand a situation or understand anything, is you have to start. One of the most important things you can learn, and sometimes it's honestly that can almost be an endpoint for wisdom to some degree, is if you know what you don't know. If you've managed to build a kind of general box or come to a couple of things like this. Okay, I now know this, I know that, I know this, but I don't know those things. I can tell right now that there are things out there, and I've identified key factors, A, B, and C. I don't know those things. I don't know them particularly well. The only thing that I know of them is their existence and that they are there. I have no idea what they are or how they do. Again, you can look at somebody in their shoes, but you don't know the exact shape of their foot. You don't know, again, because when you're in a shoe, you put your foot in a shoe and you have it for a while, it leaves indentations, right? Like there's like a permanent indentation that your foot fits into. If you're wearing shoes for quite a while and you're wearing them in, they're nice worn shoes, or they're your comfy shoes. Again, and if you've ever put on a shoe of somebody else's shoe and you try to put your foot in there, it feels wonky as shit, and you can realize how different that other person's foot falls, how different their foot is shaped, and how it ends up feeling in that shoe. And it's quite a bit different. There's some major gaps and differences. There's creases and there's bumps and there's rises that don't match your foot. Peter Boghossian is going to do this. Oh, I'm going to put myself in their shoes. That's great. That's a nice little beginning kind of exercise. But one of the biggest and most important things when you're doing that is you will eventually need to actually talk with somebody in a greater depth and respectfully, and not arguing with them, not debating with them, but actually talking with them, because you need to know unbiasedly what their actual shoe is, how it feels, what it is. And you can't go in there with some suspicious mind, because there's no reason to be suspicious of their feelings, because it's theirs. You may be suspicious of some later bits of how they perceive the world and how this goes on later, but for the most part, you need to actually honestly give a shit. The issue here is I am severely and sincerely doubtful that Peter Boghossian and many who have all kind of fallen on his side actually know what they don't know. Or are even willing to acknowledge that they don't know what they don't know. And that is a key, just massive problem. If you don't know what you don't know, that's a position of dangerous ignorance. It's a normal one to have. Many people are in there. But the first thing to acknowledge that leads to it being less dangerous is acknowledging I don't know what I don't know. And then once you learn a bit more, you might go, I know what I don't know. And then eventually you might get to a I know. Sorry, just making a note for myself here. So again, this is one of those little, it sounds good unexamined, and it sounds good just in a general, like, again, the street epistemology. You're just talking to somebody on the street, like, oh, you sound really wise and sound very fair, and he might present a somewhat fair and accurate thing. I'm not willing to throw it all away, and there could be some good stuff, but on its surface, from just a general academic, semi-philosophical approach, this perspective is basically trying to say that I'm going to be unbiased and I'm not going to be guided by ideology when I talk about this. I'm going to be guided only by the other person's ideology. And I can't think of, I think even Zizek says something like this, is that I don't think there's a single statement that is more ideologically uh, bent and ideologically determined than a statement that says, I'm not ideologically bent. Like, oh, I'm not ideologically biased. I'm not that at all. I've achieved the ability to separate myself from my own personal beliefs and ideology, and I am now going to talk about this subject in a very non-subjective, ideologically biased way. I'm gonna do that. There is no statement more ideologically biased than that. That is true ideology. That's like, oh wow, great. You are so ideologically captured that you actually can't even see it anymore at all. That's fantastic. Let's go. Let's see what Peter's got to say.
I don't believe what I'm talking about, but I would pretend to believe.
There you go. Automatic failure. Automatic failure. I'm going to try to answer it like I believe what I'm talking about. Followed immediately by a laugh and then an immediate reassurance to the audience as well as his own ego that I don't believe what I'm talking about. Stop talking. Just drop the mic and walk away. Your entire project is fucked because you can't even pretend with the sincerity. This is like an actor who is going to say, yeah, I'm going to like pretend that, you know, this is my child dying and I'm going to, you know, try to cry or whatever. But I don't actually like believe it. I don't believe it. You know, it's obviously not true. I'm just going to, obviously I don't give a shit. Immediately undermine. It's like this part of what, again, they're good actors try to actually imagine this. And especially if they have children or whatever, again, they, many actors have said this, that again, trying to get that kind of into that emotional head state, they try to imagine, even though again it's obviously fake, it's obviously not happening, and they know it's not real. There's some safety in there in the fact that it's not real. That's part of the reason why they're able to throw themselves into that role, into that mindset so readily, or relatively as readily as they can, and as eagerly as they can, because they know it's not real. So they can imagine themselves as the father who's looking down at their child dying on a hospital bed, and instead of seeing the actress Anne, whatever her little name is, and you've been acting with her and she's a great little actress, instead of that, you're imagining your actual child that's at home with the mother or with the nanny or something like that, that you woke up, you know, next to or in the same house, and you made breakfast for her that morning, and now you're imagining that you're having to be at the hospital, and you're really putting yourself in that headspace. You don't immediately fucking go, well, of course it's not really, ha 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 ha, before you even start, because you're fucking your mind up. You're automatically creating defensive mechanisms to defend yourself against any kind of revelation and or truth that may come from the position you are adopting, even temporarily. So not just as this step into a shoes on its surface somewhat ideologically impossible or difficult, but then you go further to undermine it by laughing and reassuring yourself and the audience before you even start that this is clearly ridiculous that I would ever believe these things. How can you, and you say you want to have a conversation to understand these things. All right. And you seek greater understanding. You want two minds to combine together to come up with an idea. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle of here, something like that. But here's the ego, is that the reason why the conversation fails is because a conversation like that, not a debate, but a conversation and a discourse designed for greater understanding and truth seeking, you cannot imagine yourself wrong. If you can't do that, then don't involve yourself in any discourse. If you are not prepared and not willing to accept that you are 100% fucking wrong, that it's not some middle ground, I'm right a little bit, you're right. If you're not willing to even entertain the distant possibility that you are 100% full of shit and just the dumbest goddamn thing in existence, walk away. Just walk away and continue to live in your ignorance, and don't involve yourself in these conversations. Don't comment online. Don't post shit on Twitter. You don't need to. There's no utility for you engaging in this conversation because you are not in there in good faith. So right off the bat, I know it's a small thing, but again, if I'm going to be some psychoanalytical person here to a moment, is that automatically from just a logic and philosophical kind of standpoint, Peter Boghossian has set up and then immediately disqualified himself as a fair and balanced interlocutor, as a fair and balanced representative, and just general intellectual. Again, I'm sure he's got good other things, but again, this reflex, if I was there, I would immediately call him out on this reflex and the major problems that, because he might not even realize he did it and might not even realize the implications of doing it. So maybe he might not do it in the future. He might go, wow, you know what? That might actually be true. Okay, so yes, obviously I do have my biases or whatever, but if I'm going to pretend to be this, then I should at least pretend to be this. I can't just immediately undermine it. Even if I've done this a dozen times, I'm playing the role of Hamlet. You've played it many times before. You don't get to just stop playing the role well and be a jackass. If I'm wanting them to start at ground zero with conversations for me, then I should be willing to always give good faith. This is not.
But there's only one way that we can make that work, is if you don't give a sermon. If you give a sermon, it's not going to work. So 10 to 15 seconds, come up to the mic, state your position, and then I will attempt to rebut that using, I was going to say reason and evidence, but I don't know, shit luck or something. I don't know how I'm going to rebut it.
Again, the opposite side are unreasonable. They have no reason. They have no evidence. They have no logic. They're completely and utterly non-entities, and we shouldn't even take them seriously. Why the fuck would they come to a conference being led by someone like you, or invited by someone like you, and with a crowd that apparently is probably fairly aligned with your ideology and your interests? Why would they come there? What, just so you can have a piñata to laugh at? To hit? To throw shit at? Why the fuck would they want to talk with you, Peter? If I knew that this is how you were going to conduct yourself, I wouldn't talk with you. I would immediately go, well, no, this isn't going to be productive at all. Because you're never going to respect any of my positions. And as a result, I'm going to have a hard time respecting any of your comments because I know that they don't come from a place of wanting to learn or to share knowledge with me to improve my knowledge. Because if you're doing that, then you have to also accept that there might be something that I say that will improve your knowledge and change your knowledge. You're not doing that. So again, this immediate playing to the crowd, playing to your own ego, playing to yourself. Look, I don't want sermons. You're literally sermonizing right now. The sermon is just the play acting of the the exasperated preacher trying to understand the silliness of this demonic peoples who are non-believers. It's just, I'm going to try to put myself in the mind of these non-believers, but they're just so crazy and sinful. But we'll try it out. Get fucked. Sorry, Peter, but kind of get fucked. So this is automatically 2 minutes in, and I've seen at least two major warning signs and red flags. This is sad.
Okay, so let's take a look at this. In order to make this argument work, you only need one single thing, and that is you just need to look around the room. And you need to acknowledge the fact that there are some women who are more masculine, and there are some women who are more feminine. There are some men who are more masculine, and there are some men who are more feminine.
Okay, so he's saying, all right, for this argument, and the argument is the kind of gender theorists, the ones that argue for the separation of sex and gender, the kind of the transgender things, and one of his first things is saying is that you just need to look around the room and see that there are some the women that are more feminine and some men who are more masculine. And I'm sorry, more, and vice versa. Some women are more masculine, some men are more feminine. This is simplistic to the point where it's almost incorrect, but we can maybe work with this. Part of the big issue that it talks about is we're not actually hitting the fundamental thing. You know, he's trying to present this is the more fundamental thing, is that we're observing more masculine, more feminine, Kind of true, but one of the greater things is also understanding that for this to also work, you need to also understand that ideological categorization, or that ideological kind of identifying of more, implies that there is a normative X that I would expect to see in object, say Y, or we'll say object A. There's a normative amount of X, and there's a normative amount of Y that I would associate with object B. So there's a bunch of things happening here. One, what does feminine mean? What does masculine mean? And why are you, rather than, because again, your perception of this is not an objective statement of fact about the world. It is a phenomena of your own preconceived knowledge and understandings and perspectives. So why are you perceiving one masculine, feminine to begin with, and what the hell that means, and how does that linguistically tie into other observations, other language, other communicative ideas and visuals, whatnot? The hell is undercurrent that? And two, why is there a imbalance, if you will? Why is there a discrepancy, which is implied by the more? So this is kind of barely starting this, but again, this is, if you were taking this, you might understand, okay, well, hold on, you're right. That is from like almost a mathematical thing. There's a couple of assumptions in here. There's a couple of logical assumptions that these things would need to be investigated quite a little bit. And the bigger thing is that this has nothing to do with anything that is necessarily what we might call objective about the individual, in that these things objectively align with X and Y, and they align with normativity or non-normativity, not necessarily, but they are emergent from my knowledge that has been shared with me from others, or some other expectation that has been built in my mind that I says now that this is masculine, that this is feminine, and that this is more or less. Again, nothing about a chair makes it essentially a chair. It is either our utility of the object, maybe, but also use and utility as far as our language that makes a chair a chair. Again, it's not like the chair walked up to you and said, "Hi, I'm a fucking chair." The chair is just sitting there in a block. It's just literally, and again, you can literally have a piece of stone that was whittled away by water and ice over many hundreds of years, thousands of years, and now it looks like a throne, kind of a rough hewn throne. And you go, "Oh, look, that's a throne. That's a chair. It's a rock that was eroded by water." But you, that's kind of how language is working to a certain degree. This is the problem here. Immediately I'm seeing an issue here. This is not necessarily a terrible thing, but it is deceptively simplistic. But it's not necessarily wrong. It's just where you would want to go or think about this next if you are sitting in their shoes is all of those terms that you just used. They are very, very questionable, problematic, not in a moralistic sense, but in kind of a philosophical, epistemological sense. They are problematic. They create problems because they aren't like perfect little things that, oh, well, this is just objectively true, and I'm engaging with the truth of the universe.
That's why, for example, Anne Pellegrino from New York University says that her pronouns were raped into her. Her pronouns were raped into her. My friend who's...
How the fuck did we get from there? So you're, again, this... Let me see if I could take this in good faith before I take it in what I actually believe. Is that it seems like he's trying to make some connection of, again, the perception... Kind of what I was saying there is that the perception by the secondary individual, by the non-self of the self, so the perception of the person B of person A places upon person's A gender or something like that, and he's trying to make that as kind of it was raped into her. Again, it's hyperbole. That's also annoying because yes, sometimes academics can write in very hyperbolic. I mean, I'm sorry, Peter, you've already done a lot of performative, nonsensical bullshit here in your own kind of sense. So taking to task other authors who might write in more hyperbole, more poetic language. Again, this is just kind of some weird stylistic, like, look, I can admit I'm somewhat annoyed by these kind of comments because I feel that they're overtly inflammatory to a certain degree. But I'm willing to understand that, like, okay, they're just trying to get a bit of attention for the idea. Like, the core idea is not necessarily wrong just because they dressed it up with some inflammatory language. It might actually still be somewhat correct. It could also still be incredibly wrong. But immediately bringing up in this weird segue, like, I don't see how that was immediately apparent or tied to the previous comment about more or less masculine, feminine.
Here, Colin Wright, the American biologist, would say, well, wait a second, correct me if I'm wrong at the end, we would look at morphology, look at the penis, we look at the vulva, but I'm here to present you with a completely different, would say, well,
hold on.
Her pronouns were raped into her. My friend who's here, Colin Wright, the American biologist, would say, well, wait a second, correct me if I'm wrong at the end, we would look at morphology, look at the penis, we look at the vulva.
What the fuck? Okay, beyond ideology, I'm just upset that, like, in 3 minutes, this is the most scatterbrained fucking random highlights of bullshit. Like, how the fuck are you also bringing up, well, we'll look at morphology, the penis and the vulva? How is that tying to the previous comment of the woman saying that that her pronouns were forced upon her, shall we say? Like, this isn't talking about pronouns. This isn't talking about language. Now you're just going to say, oh, well, no, this is morphology. That one, even if I'm trying to reach it like this, oh, well, the people weren't forcing this upon you. They were simply acknowledging the morphology of you and the penis and the vulva. I guess people just are seeing that, and X-ray vision looking at you for that reason. But one, it doesn't seem to actually engage at all with the primary contention of that the external is impressing upon you, the individual, a reference. They are saying you are X and can be referred to by X. Like if we were to cut out some of the hyperbole here, this doesn't really seem to. It was like, okay, so yeah, they're doing it based on morphology. My comment has nothing to do with whether or not they're doing it on morphology. My comment was more, or that individual's comment was more based upon the idea of the forcing of this, the enforcement and placement of this. And again, beyond that, just from a structural standpoint, you've managed, you're dancing around half a dozen different things, a dozen different things, and just bringing up with these quick little, it's like he's taken like these clips, these sentences from much longer conversations that are way in depth to where like, yeah, that makes sense because it was developed based on all of these previous 10, 20 ideas that were being discussed upon. It's like he just took a couple of highlights and just threw them at the beginning of his talk. Horrible.
But I'm here to present you with a completely different way to conceptualize this from the paradigm of gender ideology. And if I am successful in this, we can think about why someone would believe this, and then we can engage these claims, hopefully on their own terms. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if I actually trust any of this because one, you are almost manic with your actual structure here. And you've already proven a great deal of bias. You've already undermined it in your own mind and reassured yourself that I don't believe and I don't have, I'm not going to fall for any of these terrible things. And you may think, oh, maybe this might work for the actor analogy. But again, you've undermined it so much that I don't feel like I'm going to get an honest performance of this ideology. And I also, just based on your structure and how you've been phrasing this, I am very doubtful you're actually going to give a fair and actual comprehensive understanding. Then you're going to be able to answer questions from this perspective. Like, I just don't see it.
So we know that there are some men who are more masculine, there are the men who are more feminine, etc. So we have a kind of spectrum. I'm not going to talk about a sex spectrum. We're going to talk about how people present. Let's give a little history of this. Let's situate this in the literature. 1903 or 1913, I think it was 1903, a man by the name of Otto Weininger wrote a book, Sex and Character. Just parenthetically, when Hitler was asked if there was ever a good Jew, he said, yeah, one, Otto Weininger. Weininger was a fascinating guy, Jewish and homosexual, and he hated Jews and hated homosexuals. So it's only appropriate that I'm using Weininger's Sex and Character in this conversation. He said that when you look at relationships, like homosexual relationships.
I'm not sure why I'm not sure what the joke is for it's only appropriate that I use it here. That feels like a weird dig. Again, you say you're going to take the opposition's point of view. Just take it. Would the opposition make these jokes against themselves? No? Then shut up. Stop making these jokes. Again, you're playing a character right now. Get in goddamn character and stay in character. What's wrong with you? Just absolutely bad faith. Automatically just keeps touching upon this shit. And it's so disingenuous. So, okay. And he's bringing up that gender is a spectrum. Again, this isn't necessarily wrong. Okay-ish. Again, I'm not really gonna harp too much on the spectrum. I suspect that this is going to be taken in the wrong direction, but sure, that it's not so much that it's on a spectrum of, because a spectrum people are still going to understand as like a binary. Because you have one side and the other side of a spectrum, and they're going to see how far you are on the spectrum. That's not again, a spectrum was just kind of a shorthand, easy, colloquial way of giving a visual for dumb people, to be kind of mean about this, for laymen, I should say, to understand the fact that you have no point of origin or no absolute point of one thing or the other thing, but instead you have kind of a better thing would have been, imagine a circle, like, and then say, okay, well, where's the starting point? Well, there is none. It's a circle. Well, where's more X or Y? Where's more masculine or feminine? Not really anywhere. That's a circle. There is no point A and point B. A spectrum, they will still try to imagine and frame this as the more left, more right. Because you're on a that's the idea of the spectrum, is you have absolute 0 and then absolute 100% or something like that, and then the spectrum is some degree, and then you label 0 or 100% something masculine, feminine, and then you can still end up at some degree of binary existence, which is not really binary, it's more bimodal, if it comes to like actual sex characteristics or sexual things. But then gender itself, because of its, again, this is why I'm taking a small issue with the spectrum, but I'm going to let it go. But be aware that there's a high likelihood that this spectrum is just going to be a red herring for them to slip back into what they actually do believe in, the binary.
Relationships. You can see that some men tend toward the masculine, other men tend toward the feminine. And when you look at heterosexual relationships, it's less pronounced, but it's still there. Okay, so I'm just going to give a cursory overview.
Weird that he starts with a random dude in the 1900s, or who made some kind of observation about homosexual and cisgender and heterosexual relationships, about masculine, feminine. I feel like technically gender theory goes back very far, because again, we've been in even the more radical, like even anti-feminist and anti-woman kind of text, like I think Kant was kind of somewhat disregarding. Even those can be seen as somewhat early forms of gender theory, not necessarily in the sense that it exposes what gender theory is, or that the gender theory bases their work around those ideas, but more in like contrast to them, or than that we can see how the ideological position, these statements, and the concept of gender changes, and more importantly is influenced by people's perception, thoughts, and all these kind of things. How like the idea of gender exists before, a lot of people, I think I recently heard, like, it was Charlie Kirk or somebody who said like gender was created by Judith Butler and whatever that Money guy, like Peter Money or Paul Money. They said that is basically created in the 60s. That's how insane this has gotten. So it's still just weird just picking up one random person and kind of giving this idea that, oh yeah, this guy's the father, this guy's like one of the major originators of gender theory. It's kind of like, well, not really. Like, there's been plenty of behavioral scientists and psychologists that give just as much groundwork, and either in contrast to or in support of gender theory. Like, it's just a weird place to pick.
It's less pronounced, but it's still there. Okay, so I'm just going to give a cursory overview of the literature. In 1949, Simone de Beauvoir wrote The Second Sex. She was a French feminist and author. And she said that a woman is not, you're not born a woman is made, or you become a woman. It's a very important distinction. One becomes a woman. I'm going to skip the 90s, which is some really interesting work. I'm going to jump to Judith Butler's 1990 Gender Trouble, and that I just want to say these are not obscure people I'm talking about. And there's a very simple way. I don't want you to believe anything I say. You can test this yourself. You can go to scholar.google.com. You punch in my name. You can punch in someone's name, and it gives you an H index. That is a number of citations. So these are extremely well cited people. These are not fringe people in the literature, and we'll talk about that later. So Judith Butler says that
Again, so far, nothing's really been said that's 100% incorrect. Again, he is saying he is summarizing rather quickly, but I feel like you probably could spend a bit more time. But okay, yeah, we have the concept of social and gender roles and the idea of Beauvoir with the whole becoming a woman and the kind of you are not born a woman, but you become it through the imposition of patriarchal gender roles and expectations and that kind of that aspect of it. And then you're getting gender trouble. We'll see what he says about gender trouble. Again, I haven't read Beauvoir, Simone de Beauvoir, in a real long time, so I myself am having to rely a bit on ancient summarization here.
gender is performed. You perform it. You perform it through the adornments of the culture. You perform it through gender rituals. I was at a party in Austin a while ago, Austin, Texas, and I met there were two people.
So then gender trouble is performance of these gender roles and expectations and concepts of this, building upon the kind of you your womanhood and or your gender is created, not inherent, not something that is just emergent upon an emergent phenomena from the self, but it rather is one that is emergent from the culture and placed upon the self. Gender trouble is the performance of this, is that if what you do engage with is that by placing it upon you and then encouraging you to do this, you are encouraged to perform out this thing that has been uh, placed upon you, this gender, and you perform it, and your performance kind of denotes the degree of acceptability you are, is how well you are able to perform to the normative standards of the thing that has been placed upon you, and encourages you and kind of warps and influence you to do this to where you think you're doing this because it is natural rather than a idea that has been essentially mind virused into you. We want to use some kind of uh, spicy language.
A native woman and a trans woman on a couch, and I shook the person's hand. I said, "Hi, my name's Peter," and I can't remember her name is whatever. And then when the trans woman, and she shook my hand like this, and I thought that was very interesting because she performed what it was to be a woman.
Kind of. Again, this is where again I am uncertain about a lot of the way Peter Boghossian is phrasing these things, but just kind of as a side note, not necessarily a critique of Boghossian, is that yeah, again, this might be one of those things where somebody might say, well, this is doesn't mean that you're actually gender or gender is real. It's actually just personality. And that's kind of the Charlie Kirk kind of thing, is that people are still men and women and gender doesn't exist. It's just personality. And where he goes on to even greater bigoted links. But then that would be kind of if you were to think about it even from that point of view, then I guess, well, then okay, but then any kind of use of the word man or woman or the social and general expectations or your perceptions of these things is still just as unobjective and non-objective as the sex and gender divide suggests in a different theory. So either way, like, okay, you're interested that, oh, they're performing, like, that could be that they chose to do this performatively. But the other thing is I also wonder if Peter Boghossian is going to see performance as something that is extremely deliberate and manipulative, like again somebody who's deliberately doing and acting in exactly this way with very strong consciousness of this. And I'm not so sure on that. And I'm fairly certain, again, like there's some degree of conscious engagement with this, but a lot of it is, again, the non-conscious. Even though they're aware and they're doing this, it's not necessarily a strong conscious awareness that I am doing this for X reasons. It's just I'm doing this, and the X reasons are the thing that they don't actually realize. That's what society has kind of placed upon them, is these expectations become, to use a really bad phrase, hardwired into them by society and expectations. But either way, we'll go on.
Now, lest anyone think that these are just mere philosophical ramblings of people, we have overwhelming evidence from the anthropological literature that the ideas, I'm not going to mention gender, but the way people present sexually, these are not immutable, eternal time.
Why not mention gender? I'm just kind of curious, why would you not mention gender? Why would you not put this in the same realm? Okay, so the way they present their sex, isn't that literally gender is the way in which society is creating rules and concepts to present one's so-called sex and or social role reflection of this. Like, there, it's not all of it, but there are aspects of this. So why wouldn't you bring up gender here? Just not sure why the hesitation.
People present sexually, these are not immutable, eternal, timeless, kind of subspecies eternitatis characteristics or categories of people. And if you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend it. The 1998 book, Travesti, Travesti. It looks at the lives of Brazilian prostitutes. And among the things that it does in that book is it makes the argument there are biological men who get adornments to be women and become prostitutes. And it blurs the gender boundaries. Okay, so we know that these categories, we know that there are categories. We know that certain people present as male and female. We know that the categories that we have are not the same as the categories that other people have. So why would we do this? Why would we be doing this? For this, you need.
And well, I mean, it's not just that we know we have categories and that our categories differentiate from other people's categories. But even then, that kind of is overselling it to a certain degree, because, like, even those categories themselves within the culture are, again, to use that kind of Wittgenstein language, they're fuzzy at best. And they are very much created and manufactured and maintained and changed. But okay, nothing terrible there. Again, I'm not much of a gender theorist, so this is outside of my wheelhouse, but my general knowledge would suggest that this isn't the worst way to go about this, but, or at least that comment.
To import another line of literature, another body of literature for this. We need to understand when people are born with a penis and when people are born with a vagina. When someone is born with a penis, they're born into a set of privileges. When someone is born with white skin.
Okay, so he's bringing in part of gender theory, is he's bringing in kind of a certain degree of, whether it be critical race theory and or a kind of a basis of some degree of feminism in the idea of the oppressed and oppressor class distinctions along gender lines. Again, he's doing this in kind of a very haphazard, bad faith manner, in the sense that, like, I don't. I mean, he might elaborate a bit more, but so far it's kind of a awkward way to jump into this. But, like, okay, to understand this ideology, you also need to understand that there is a class hierarchical structure that relates to specifically the class of gender and the performance of gender, and not just within the genders. You have the hierarchy of femininity and the hierarchy of masculinity, but then you have a kind of meta or greater overall hierarchy of the patriarchal structure. And again, this is very well studied, and it has been at least major components of this theory have been they just are. They're about as again they're about as true as you can get. Our framing and understanding are about as true as you can get in any kind of study of people, social sciences, and just general understanding of how people work.
They're born with a set of privileges. When someone is born with white skin, they're born with a set of privileges.
And again, this is oversimplifying, is that that's not necessarily what they're saying. What they're saying is due to certain historical factors, due to certain actions in the past, because this is oftentimes very much centered in what has happened now, is that actions within the past and within especially Western culture, which where they're kind of looking at this primarily, is that this this idea of the again white skin, or again whites being superior to blacks, develops and is used for justification of many atrocities, many terrible things. But it's not so much that people were born with white skin in 1300 England were more privileged than people born without white skin. Like, it's perhaps somewhat true, but for the most part, what they're talking about is to some degree is what would come about from these somewhat basic understandings and these racial and or ethnic prejudices after colonization, and through the efforts of colonization. It has created a general meta narrative in the consciousness of Western society of white skin being better, black skin, dark skin being less good, and this creates kind of a a natural privilege in the white skin, that, or at least what I would suggest, and I think some have even argued this, it's not so much that it automatically gives the privilege, it gives the potentiality of privilege. Kind of like how a recessive gene might exist in there, and that if there's the right conditions are met, the recessive gene comes into fruition. And if the necessary conditions outside of this or something else doesn't activate that recessive gene, then the recessive gene remains recessive and does not activate. That kind of is the thing. So that you can absolutely have instances where someone born with white skin does not ever achieve any degree of privilege, or is not able to activate, or that privilege that is embedded in that trait never ever comes to fruition because of the environmental nature around it, and the limitation of any kind of actualizer, if you want to think of it in like potentiality and actualizer energy or influence can actualize and make real the potentiality. So this is somewhat overly simplistic kind of understanding. And again, I'm sure there are plenty of extremists out there who might argue that argue greater than this from the gender and critical race theories kind of side. But I think a good number of, and I would say the vast majority of both of those kind of theoretical positions and people who practice them would probably, if we had to choose, like, do you think that this is inherent, or do you think like just a thing all the time, or do you think that this is kind of a potentiality that is the potentiality is a manufactured potentiality first and foremost, and that it is also still a potentiality because we can absolutely have scenario situations where that potentiality ultimately does not make any material social economic difference, because the environment around it and the general interactions of that environment would not and cannot activate the the again the manufactured potentiality. I think most would probably agree, well, yeah, in Western society in general, it does create numerous situations and does try to create a general societal like environmental position, environmental state that will actualize to a greater extent that potentiality than not, but that doesn't mean it is always going to do this. So that is kind of how I would elaborate a bit more on this. Again, whether or not Peter Boghossian wants to do that or is capable of doing that, I don't know.
Alison Bailey has she's a white feminist philosopher. She has a essay in 2017 tracking privilege preserving epistemic pushback. Basically, that means privilege seeks to preserve itself. Derek Bell, the law professor, Harvard law professor, talks about the only reason whites gave blacks to vote was because they were afraid of an uprising. They didn't do it because they thought it was the right thing to do. They didn't do it for civil rights. They didn't do it for social justice. They didn't.
Again, I don't necessarily agree with Derek Bell's simplification of this. I think that this, I'm not sure if I'm willing to say that it doesn't constitute a majority of the opinion, or that it wasn't at least partly in concert with it. But I would say that I think it overly simplifies this down. I think it is entirely possible for somebody want to give somebody the vote at that time for purely humanitarian, egalitarian purposes, but also doing this with the acknowledgement that if they don't do this based upon egalitarian principles, or kind of epistemological knowledge of how things work in an egalitarian kind of mindset, that this might result in violence and or egregious problems, not based upon racial lines, but based upon the concept that, again, somebody who is being treated unequally, who should be treated equally, will respond negatively. So, yeah, I would say I disagree with Derek Bell to a certain degree on this matter.
Do it for any of that.
At least as far as Peter Boghossian is presenting him. Again, I touched upon Derek Bell very briefly. And it's been a while, so I'm fully willing to admit that there's probably some degree of oversimplification on the part of Boghossian, but just responding to what has been said there, I would disagree with that oversimplification.
In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. has a wonderful little essay, letter from a Birmingham jail, in which he talks about, he writes very specifically, the privileged do not voluntarily give up their privilege. The privileged do not voluntarily give up their privilege. So we have extant categories in society that the doctor assigns when he sees you. He assigns you sex at birth, not these specious morphological categories, but he assigns you based upon a physical characteristic. But we know we can look from our eyes and we can see that that is not the case. Okay, so let's take this to another look from our categories.
Hold on, I missed something there. There's somewhat of a bit of a rambling there that I might have missed. Let's go back a second.
Not these specious. So we have extant categories in society that the doctor assigns when he sees you. He assigns you sex at birth, not these specious morphological categories, but he assigns you based upon a physical characteristic. But we know we can look from our eyes and we can see that that is not the case. Okay, so let's take this to another level.
I guess he's still standing from the... I guess he's still trying to adopt the gender theorist kind of perspective, but again, he just kind of say, but we can see with our eyes that this is not true. Like, how and why? I know you're adopting the oppositions, but like, explain the opposition, why the opposition would say that. What do you mean by that? That was a little bit kind of generally confused and vague.
So we know that these categories and people in power and people have privilege don't want to repudiate the privilege. We know that they've codified these in laws and through our institutions. What we don't know, which is perhaps less conspicuous, less naked, is that once you buy into these categories of privilege, you see the world in certain ways. Foucault in 1975 wrote a book, Discipline.
Okay, yeah, I suppose it's a little bit better than what he's been doing, but I don't have too many protests on that.
And Punish in 1976, he wrote another book about the history of sexuality. And in that, he uses the word power knowledge. Helen Pluckrose is here in the audience. She's written about that very extensively. Some of her work I highly recommend. How French Intellectuals Destroyed the West is a wonderful piece.
I find it interesting that, there's a degree of disdain for the hyperbole of the gender theorists. And then he mentions, oh, by the way, I have this Helen Pluckrose wrote a book that says how French intellectuals destroyed the West. No comment on that.
But Foucault talks about power knowledge. So when you have power knowledge, it's one word, power knowledge. Power and knowledge, you cannot differentiate between them. You're born with a penis, you just see the world a certain way. You're born with a certain skin color, you see the world a certain way.
Uh, no, like that. It's hard for me to critique that because that's a very confusing way to understand. Again, it's not that you're born with a penis or born with a race and you see the world a certain way. Like this is necessarily inherent in there. It's more, again, it's always connected to the social construction. Is that you see the world this way because you were taught through the power structures this a certain way, and you are encouraged through, again, either the rise in power or the loss of power, punishment and reward, to believe in certain ways and certain things and to act in certain ways. um and again, that kind of this it's very much simplifying down a lot of the idea of the power knowledge, and more importantly just power dynamics within there. I don't That's weird.
Way. So when we assign these categories at birth, we're consigning people to ways of living in the world in which certain individuals have less privilege based upon an exogenous characteristic. But those characteristics are not immutable. Those characteristics are not fungible. We can change and we can alter those characteristics to yield more privilege and more epistemic authority and more power in our own lives.
Again, the way he rephrases this is very weird. It's very weird, and it's tickling a part of back my brain that makes this feel somewhat bullshit. But it is somewhat true. Again, it's not so much that you can change these categories. You're not necessarily changing these categories for more or less privilege. Like you do that, I suppose, on the larger meta scale, and that might be, again, the upper echelon power class. If you think of it as like a Marxist thing, the rich or the those in power will manipulate these things to maintain their power to make sure that they're at the top. But for the general individual, they their power is more derived, if you can see it as that, from the conformity to these power structures that are being established within society and reinforced and reified. Um, it's just kind of a little weird.
Okay. Okay, so where are we now? So that is, I only have a half an hour, but that was a very brief overview of some of the seminal lines of literature. I believe.
I would say the biggest problem I would have this is, while it's somewhat brief, it is still filled with so many small little inaccuracies and weird phrasing and kind of nonsensical aspects that this is a kind of a terrible background of this. It's a fairly bad faith background.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that Foucault was currently is the most cited scholar in history. He has the highest H index of anyone in the world.
I think so. I I think so. That might be true, actually. I don't know. I would have to take a look at that. Look that up. I don't know. Maybe I can look that up here. Um, why'd you put it there? Can't see it. This window out of the side here. Let me look. I think it's Foucault. Oh, this might be the wrong place. I suppose if you're looking at the humanities, again, that's another important thing is the distinguishing between humanities and not. So I'm seeing a couple of things here. All living people who have the highest ones. Again, I wouldn't. I'm just using. I'm just looking up this as kind of a fun little exercise. Yeah, Foucault I think is the highest right now. He has the most citations. Yeah, yeah. His H index is pretty high. Right below him, again, you're trying to present this like, oh, he's super influential, super powerful. To a certain degree, yeah, he is very influential. But honestly, a lot of times, citation does not always mean agreement, and citation also doesn't mean that the theory is 100% based in him or based around them. Again, it could just be simply looking at a newer theory that, again, examining this, it's like, again, a lot of people just throw in Foucault's name because it's kind of useful, in a way. But actually, as you look below that, I believe it's Kessler, who is I think he's in what, chemistry, biology, Kessler in. Harvard Medical School. Looks like what, psychiatric epidemiology. And we have Colts, Sigmund Freud, and again, looking at, okay, Sigmund Freud decided, it's like, yeah, Sigmund Freud decided a lot. Oftentimes, not necessarily because what he said was true, but kind of like, okay, here's the origin of the idea as understood by Freud, but again, this would be to use this, especially if you're going to use this to somehow denigrate current theory, because it is based somewhat on Foucault's work, would be kind of like trying to attack modern day kind of evolutionary theory because it's based in Darwin, and like looking at, oh, see, here's the flaws of Darwin, ergo these flaws are in the current modern contemporary understanding of evolutionary theory, which is not really true. Again, evolutionary theory is very aware of the errors of its again, of Darwin, and has gone out of its way to create and or to answer and to modify the theory to better answer the questions and avoid those same pitfalls. So be careful of anything like this. Oh, this comes from this one person and they're super crazy and terrible. It's like, well, you got to be really careful with that because it's pretty easily to become very dishonest.
So I don't want people to think I'm cherry picking.
And I feel like Kessler and just as a side note, I feel like I thought Kessler was in the lead for a while, so it might be one of those things where they're trading off. It's Foucault and Kessler are trading off back and forth, but Foucault definitely has a lot of citations, but that's because there's a shitload of papers that, like, his ideas touch upon a lot of things. It kind of happens.
Obscure figures from the history of Western intellectual thought. I am absolutely not doing that in any way.
You did bring up a rather obscure intellectual person with the Jewish scientist who apparently Hitler liked so much, or the Jewish psychologist or whatever. Like, I don't know why you brought like that. I don't think he's a particularly major figure. I haven't heard of him, at the very least.
So, could we please play some clips?
And I don't think there's ever the most concrete definitions when it comes to nuanced topics. However, you can't just be defining words however you want. And you know that for a fact. Colloquially, things mean things. And colloquially, we all know what that shit means. You cannot describe it as a pastrami sandwich. There is very clear parameters that you can work within. You may disagree on specific nuances, but the overall, like, you can't just describe anything as anything. Words have meaning for a reason.
Like man and woman.
Yeah, trans women are women. Like, I don't... See, you keep trying to get people like, caught up. What is your point?
So, again, you grabbed some random... Again, this is the Ben Shapiro fucking special here. Grabbing somebody who... And again, you're doing half a dozen different filmings, and you find the one that is the most emotionally charged, and then you're cutting out any context that might have happened before, any comments or phrases that you might have said or other people might have said that could otherwise increase this, and just cutting into look at crazy women saying crazy things and look how emotional they are and respond and like reactive.
We'll see another
I suppose you can't change your biological, your chromosomal sex. But if you mean in terms of things like gender affirming care, like hormones, I think absolutely people under the age of 18 should be allowed to take hormones or hormone blockers if they want. I think, if children can if people under the 18 can make their own medical decisions for other things, then what is
Can they?
Well, I think they can in Australia.
Yeah, I can't speak to the island here. Like, what can they change? What can they make medical decisions for under 18?
Well, I mean, for example, if you...
So, again, are we talking philosophically, morally, or legally the idea of consent? And again, they all tie a little bit to each other, but there are differences. So again, just because you found a couple of young people, notice again, these are all just young people. You wanted, I want to talk to the experts, but they don't want to talk to me. Well, do you ever talk to the experts? Again, you're using the fact that a bunch of people, off the street, and yes, people off the street, when you start asking them to defend these ideas or talk about these ideas, they're probably not going to do a particularly good job, because one, they might not be in practice of doing that. Two, they might not have had it immediately on their mind. Three, they're frequently not experts on this issue. Or even if they were, just like you can have interviewing people on the street, like just name a woman, and then you shout at them, name a woman, and somebody freezes up. Like, again, this is not somehow, look how stupid people are. It's like, look, you're asking these questions, and we can't ignore the situation. Just kind of like it's like it's the issue of almost like when you're studying like quantum mechanics and stuff like that, is like the observer issue. Is you can't ignore the fact that whatever your test system, your approach, the way of capturing this information itself is somewhat transformative or influential on it. No matter how unbiased you are trying to be, many ways, unless you are incredibly careful and you are setting this up incredibly well, it's going to have the thing. And again, that's the very opposite of this street epistemology, is to literally, I just want to catch people when they're at their natural state. It's like, yeah, but you're not. You're catching them not, and again, it also is biasing this idea of like, this is just their natural, basic kind of ideological state, and they aren't prepared to think this thing. It's like, yeah, but that's not indicative of anything about the ideas, concepts, or anything like that. That's like, again, asking a random person or just stopping somebody who's a math student and asking them to explain these complicated math formulas or whatnot. They might make mistakes or issues. That's not an issue with the math formula or the theory. That's an issue just with humans and the interview style. This whole ad hoc, just talking to them on the street, it just applies to the same kind of bias and ignorance that supplement like health supplements use. Like, this is all natural chia seed fucking sweat, and it's gonna cure you of cancer. It relies on that same kind of naturally grown, natural. It's natural. That must mean it's super good. Amazing, I love it. Again, it's just this is just bad faith stuff. And again,
I'm not sure what that initial, if we were to look at her, like, again, her first little argument is, okay, things mean things. This is it. Are you showing this to show like, oh, well, people know this to be true, but then when it comes to gender, they also don't? That does not indicate, one, that the initial idea and her initial understanding of that things have to mean things, that might actually be the problem. Nothing about this suggests that the problem was when she hesitated on gender.
And you know that for a fact. There, colloquially, things mean things. And colloquially, we all know what that shit means. You cannot describe it as a pastrami sandwich. There is very clear parameters that you can work within. You may disagree on specific nuances, but the overall, like, you can't just describe anything as anything. Words have meaning for a reason.
Like man and woman.
Yeah, trans women are women. Like, I don't... See, you keep trying to get people like, caught up.
And again, that is trying to get them caught up. Like man and woman. And again, you're relying on this kind of natural, homegrown, everybody knows what this is saying, but this is completely ignoring the entire thing that they were saying before. It says like, yeah, but if we do know that society is influential on our thoughts and feelings, even if you don't take it to the degree that maybe Foucault or Beauvoir or anyone else says, you just understand that to be true, then it is very likely that your colloquial meaning, that simplistic man and woman, we know what those things are, that knowledge is informed not just by you, not just by biology, not just by some kind of naturally occurring, a God-given understanding, but that is manufactured, maintained, and manipulated to some degree by society, which means that, yes, you might argue, oh, there's a colloquial meaning, there's kind of a general meaning, like she was saying, but that also, are we to take, oh, well, that's what people believe, but then when it comes to gender, it's not. It's like, it could be also like, look, here's the thing. People are wrong all the time, so it could very well be that because they've received enough instruction, they understand that the issues of the language of man and woman, but they're ignorant of how this is also revelatory about all language, and either they just don't know that, but they've been taught. It's kind of like, again, you have this is like saying, hey, where were Nazis in around the 1930s? Where could you find Nazis? And everyone would say, well, you could find the Nazis in Germany. And it's like, that's the only place. Yeah, that's where they were in 1930s. They were in Germany. It's like, well, no. There's Nazi parties outside of there. And in fact, again, there was a fairly famous Nazi march in the United States. So Nazism was not just purely located, but the colloquial knowledge, the general knowledge is like, oh, well, yeah, Nazis were generally in Germany. It's like, well, yeah, it's kind of true, but also not. Ultimately, actually not true. In the most specific and explicit and truest form of it, it's just not true. So again, you're using the fact that, oh, well, she said X and then she said Y. That disproves Y's validity. It's like this, well, no, you could absolutely have X was wrong, and then she's more correct on Y, and Y's correctness actually applies to the same things that she was saying before, like pastrami or anything like that, in the general understanding of how language and linguistics works. But you also just be making a tactical decision, is that it's very difficult to deal with the world in that same manner. Here's another example. When she's talking about the pastrami sandwich, the equivalent of this is like using basic Newtonian physics and using kind of just general Newtonian style physics and Newtonian style math. It works a large percentage of the time. But I may be somewhat incorrect. I'm not a math person, but I've always heard it explained like this. But the second you get outside into space, or you start getting into any larger things, again, Newtonian physics don't work quite so well. And the big thing is that technically, like quantum mechanics and kind of the more quantum theory relating to mathematics, and again, you relating to these more advanced, crazier mathematics, that actually gives a much better answer. but it's way fucking harder to do in the shorthand. And for the most part, the answer that you get doing basic algebra, Newtonian kind of shit, it works. Is it actually correct? Well, no. Technically, it's not correct. It's a decent approximation, and it works well enough. But no, it's not fucking correct. It's not right. It's just the general mathematical knowledge and ability you would need to actually get to the right answer is really, really high. So again, oh, well, she says this, like, yeah, but she actually could be very much wrong. And again, you're just kind of like applying, like, I just want to use, quantum mechanics is wrong because generally everybody wants to use Newtonian or use this more basic math. It's like this. That doesn't mean that it's wrong. That just means that it's easier. It's simpler, more straightforward. It doesn't mean it's right. It means it's correct. And doesn't mean that we can't, if we can find a way to, like, let's change some of the actual physics and math that we're teaching that comes from the lessons we learned from the advanced X math. We will then modify the less advanced but easier Y math and change it in such a way to where it's still relatively easy on the same easy thing, but it's slightly more accurate. It still won't be as accurate as X, but X is very difficult to do. But we can teach parts and ideas and concepts relating to X earlier on so that people can understand, one, the gaps in Y, but also it can modify Y so that it better comports to the knowledge and the truth that we do know from X. But again, this is dishonest framing. Again, that immediate attack. Why bring up that? Why bring up man and woman? There's lots of words that have... You could have said good and evil. You could have brought up good and evil. That's equally just as controversial. But also, depending on your stance, again, there is a colloquial within the Western civilization. There's concepts that we have that are generally applied to what is a good or nice action, what is an evil or bad action. But we also see the problems of this. He could have said anything, but he wants to say this because he wants to trigger students, because it's a hot button issue. Dishonest.
What is your point?
Yeah, what is your fucking point? You don't actually have much of a good point.
We'll see
I
another one.
suppose you can't change your biological, your chromosomal sex like hormones. I think then what is
Can they?
Well, I think they can in Australia.
Yeah, I can't speak to the island here. Like, what can they change? What can they make?
Now, I'm going to point out something just to be just as pedantic and kind of mean-spirited as, again, to a certain degree, that Boghossian is kind of being. Did he just refer to Australia as an island? Did he refer to Australia as an island? Is he on an island near Australia? Is he in New Zealand? Why is he talking about, well, in Australia? Like, I'm...
Australia.
Yeah, I can't speak to the island here. Like, what can...
The island here. Is he in Australia? And did he just refer to Australia as an island? Notice how, again, we mock and talk shit about the student when they are mildly incorrect, when they're just speaking off the cuff. And we take that as a major detriment to the theoretical groundwork of academia in certain fields. But then Peter Boghossian calls Australia an island, which even fifth graders know Australia is not an island. It's a continent. It's a small continent, but continent, not a fucking island. By definition, by objective reality definition, it's not an island. But you used some colloquial dumbass perspective because you keep seeing Australia on a map and it looks kind of small because it's on a map and it's surrounded by water. So anything that is surrounded on all sides by water that's kind of smallish, it must be an island. Because that's how that's how colloquial knowledge works. But again, if you were to think about that, oh, that's what defines an island, surrounded on all sides by water, and it's kind of smallish. Like, what do you mean smallish? Like but on the map it appears small. That doesn't mean it is small. More importantly, that also doesn't necessarily determine if it is a fucking island or not. And is it surrounded on water all times, or only during high tide? Does that make it an island or not? What? Again, this appeal to colloquial knowledge, this appeal to the simplicity of existence, is anti-intellectual.
Can they change? What can they make medical decisions for under 18?
Well, I mean, for example, if you had a dicky knee and you wanted to get some surgery to fix that,
you don't.
So again, I think the person is somewhat incorrect. Again, you would still need parental supervision, but again, you can legally, I think you can go through a process to get these things. I think it would involve maybe some emancipation or some shit like that if your parents don't want you to do it. But again, this is one of the things where we're splitting hairs over legal, moral aspects right here, which is important, but again should be stated more clearly and elaborated on.
Need your parents' signature?
you could decide if you're, I think, over 16, you could say, I want to get this knee surgery. And the thing is, knee surgery has a much, much, much higher regret rate than things like, double mastectomies for
Knee surgery has a higher
regret rate. It's something like 30-40% people regret getting their knee surgery because it doesn't have the results they wanted. People have had gender affirming.
I think that might actually be true. I don't know if that's just kind of a weird statistic, but again, this idea that there is a lot of people who regret their transitioning process and their surgeries is not necessarily formed out to be true. And the parts that are true, it's not that far off percentage-wise from just general regret and or unhappiness with many different types of surgeries, such as like knee surgery or any kind of surgeries, back surgery, because they have it and then they don't get the results that they necessarily want, or it doesn't fix all of these issues and these problems, and they quote unquote regret it. But again, usually if you were also to like break it down to the brass tacks like this, would you have preferred not to get this? Like they say, like they regret, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't want it. They just like, the regret is more of a, I wish this had done more and I regret doing this. So like, okay, so you wouldn't have wanted to get the surgery. Yes. But then, like, if you have the doctor actually explain the things to them again, like this, hey, just to remind you, this is what you would have to be dealing with without the surgery, they'd be like, well, like, I don't want to say I want the surgery because I know what the results were. Like, if we were to, like, genie snap them into some kind of Rawlsian space where they're separate from these things, they would probably say, well, I don't necessarily want the surgery because I know what the results were, and I was disappointed with them because I was hoping for more, and I only got a little bit of good rather than a lot of good. But I also don't not want the surgery because I know that not having the surgery would have been just as bad, if not worse. So the regret is less of a, I wish if I could go back and change time, I would do things differently. It's more of a, I wish I could go back in time and put my coin in the slot machine and pull it again and get a different result. Like, there's that eternal hope that, if things had turned out, if things had done a little bit different, if I could go back and do this again, it would turn out slightly different. Maybe I would come out rather than just having, 10 per units of good, I would have 20 units of good and it would be better. Or instead of, my back improving by 40%, it would improve by 48%, 56%. Instead of my knee improving by 70%, it would have been like 85%. Again, the idea, the regret of surgery is not absolute in its meaning or how we might interpret it. And beyond that, again, a lot of gender affirming care, the regret rates of any of these kind of actions are fairly in line, at least from what I've seen. There might be statistics that show otherwise, but from what I've seen, they're fairly in line with most surgeries, even like knee surgery and shit like that, like stuff that doesn't have nearly the psychological, emotional, or like social impact as gender affirming care surgery. So yeah, that I do believe this is true. From what I remember from, again, some of the articles that I've seen, floating about the space and just general knowledge of surgery regret.
Surgery, very small amount of them regret that. A large proportion of the people who regret it is because they're still not accepted by their community, or they face even worse abuse because they had that surgery.
Yeah, that's also partly true. That's another little factor.
Okay. Hope testing. Okay, so the first one was from the United States. This one, the last clip, was from Australia. And
yeah, the island Australia. I'm not going to let you go on that, because if you're going to be a pedantic asshole to these kids, you get it right back.
Key is see if you can distill this, and then now that the infrastructure is more or less laid, you can situate the claim so you can understand, while he may not know Judith Butler or Foucault or Alison Bailey or what have you, you can see how that idea germinates in the soil of the literature. Okay, that was at Flanders.
Kind of. Like, again, that is really too fast and too bullshitty. Like, I would not have done... Like, you need to spend way more time laying the groundwork. Like, you laid shitty groundwork, and then you would need to, like, oh, you can see. Like, no, don't assume. Lay it out for them. Explain it to them in a Socratic method, if you want. Explain to them, show them how you can see the roots of this.
Station in Australia. Next one.
Not having that option to have medical care to affirm your gender would be detrimental to a child.
So this is the question then, if I have understood this correctly. The question then is, at what age?
I think...
Because you use the word child. At what age does that mean to you? I mean below 18, above, like, to below, no? Yeah.
Below, I think a child can make a decision probably as young as...
And again, just because again, this guy's never really thought about this at all. You're pulling him off the street and he has a general, like, and you might go, oh, well, would be the same equivalent of, and perhaps there could be some truth to this, but again, this isn't a denigration of the field. It's more a denigration of, in general, people create shorthand, crappy models of this theory that are easier for them to understand because they don't spend a lot of time actually studying this. Like, this isn't really, oh, the theory is terrible and bad, and look at all the bad thoughts that come about from this. This doesn't show that at all. It just shows that people, in general, don't understand a lot of what they're talking about. Great. What's the next fucking thing you want to talk about? People's math skills tend to be lower than we might imagine? Wow. What else are you going to say? People forgot what the quadratic equation is used for? My God. Apparently math is completely debunked. Because people forgot what the quadratic equation does. Oh no.
5, 6, 7 years old.
And why are they laughing? Don't laugh. Don't smile, don't laugh, don't encourage this. You're being the opposition. You're being the opposition. Again, just this general preaching to the choir. You don't want sermonization, but you're preaching to the choir. How dare they? And again, remember what he said is gender-affirming care. I do believe that's what the guy said. Look back.
Because you use like
care. Not having that option to have medical care.
Not having an option to not have medical... Again, he's really trying to think this out. Basically, a child not having the option to have access to medical care.
To affirm your gender.
To affirm gender.
Would be detrimental to a child.
Is detrimental to a child. Now, everyone else is going to run with this. Oh my God, like surgeries and all this kind of shit. And notice again the setup there. We set up surgeries before. Now this guy says gender medical care. Not having access to medical care for gender affirming kind of things. Well, and that's so ridiculous. Oh, so let's take an instance of a boy due to a genetic abnormality or some degree has incredibly low testosterone, dangerously low. I'm sure there's a condition out there, and he's developing improperly to a certain degree because his testosterone is so low. He's a boy, and he wants to affirm his gender as a boy. The parents want to do this because the boy wants to be a boy, and they want their boy to be a boy. But due to some happenstance of genetics or whatever, his development is not going according to plan and not in a healthy and safe manner because his testosterone, for whatever reasons, or certain biological things that are happening, hormones are not being properly produced. Should that person have access to gender affirming healthcare? And you might go, well, hold on, you're separating these words out. No. This is included. This is kind of like the conservative anti-abortionists constantly talking about how Planned Parenthood is just for abortions, despite the fact that I've seen multiple times and even heard from people who work there, people who are around it, like the vast majority of what they do, like 90% or more of the funding and the general shit that they do day to day, across the board, year to year, has nothing to do really with abortions. It has more to do with stuff like condom use, STIs, STDs, prevention like that, sex education, basic reproductive health care that sometimes can be difficult to find or difficult to access to. Like, it's across the board general sex and health fucking services. And yes, abortion is one aspect of it, but it's kind of like the smallest, least frequent part of the whole package. Gender affirming care, it's not just, and again, you might say, well, this is going to be the minority, but then again, like this, your prescriptions would say, we need to ban this, we need to stop this is all terrible, whatever. So now that boy who wants to be a boy, who was born a boy from a sex standpoint and wants to be a gender boy, but because of hormonal issues, some kind of genetic thing, he's not developing correctly. His parents want him to. They all go to the hospital and saying, the parents are consenting, the child clearly wants it too. And the hospital's like, that's great. Sadly, fucking legislator pushed forward by dumbass bigots, helped supported by Peter Boghossian, have made it basically illegal for me to do fucking anything other than to give your kid an aspirin and say, good luck, Timmy. Sorry that you're going to fucking suffer from these problems for the rest of your goddamn life, or at least until you're 18, and then you can try again. But honestly, most of the supports and the funding or any kind of study into this is probably going to be dead by then, because no doctors want to study this and work on this because they know it's just a career killer, because they'll be fucking thrown in prison for providing gender health care to fucking kids. Fuck you, Peter. This is genuinely not cool. Fucking asshole.
So this is the question then, if
at what age? Any age, necessarily. One, yes, the parents should overdo this, but again, he might be talking in more moral and philosophical things, like the parents want this to happen to their 8-year-old child. What if the parents want to turn the kid, let's say the parents wanted a boy and they were born with a girl. So then they go to the gender affirming care center and they say, I want you to turn this boy into a girl because we wanted a girl. And then the young boy says, I don't want to be turned into a girl. I want to be a boy. Then the doctors say, well, sorry, kid, you can't fucking consent to any of this. Fuck you. Notice again, okay, well, hold on. So we do take, to some degree, the child's wants, desires, and consent into consideration. So this idea that it's so radically crazy that a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old or whatever might have some kind of concepts of consent, and that we might want to, even if it's not legal, or even if from a legal standpoint, that from a moral and ethical standpoint, we might want to consider that to some degree, even if it doesn't take 100% precedent, we might want to consider it. That idea is laughable to these people. Why? Because they're closed-minded and they actually aren't thinking in any kind of depth, despite what he's trying to say. Well, let's think about this deeply. Let's really engage, get to the nitty-gritty. They're not. They're just laughing.
Okay.
Fuck these people. This is actual what bigotry looks like. Again, this is what ugliness actually looks like. It's not again, screaming with tiki torches. It's this quiet disdain and this happy acceptance for awful actions.
Okay, so none of these people are actors. That was in Puerto Rico. Next one.
There are
That was in also Puerto Rico. Was that person a native English speaker? Because that also might explain some of the awkwardness there. It could be. I don't know. But again,
people who are 18 and they are considered adults, but they think like maybe 15 or 14 years old, and there are people who are 14 or 15 years old and they are thinking like 20 years old or even older people.
so this is just, again, just a young person. Yes, young people can be wrong and incorrect. So I guess we just throw out the whole fucking ideology. Well, the ideology has inspired these minds. That doesn't... I'm willing to bet you there are thousands of 16, 17, 18-year-old math kids who, if you ask them certain things about really, really high-end concept mathematics and quantum mechanics, they're going to spout equally levels of dumb bullshit because they don't 100% understand the theory. And if you were to ask them, do you think that it's going to be possible to travel through like black holes or like wormholes, they might even say, well, yeah, like we could probably do something like that. Like, yeah, you could like use the black hole to kind of pierce through space and time because, you know, it kind of warps space and time. Like, yeah, but and then you ask, like, again, but that does that mean that that's what the ideology says? That's what the theory of mathematics when it comes to black holes say? No. Because most of them would probably say, well, no, that's not going to happen. You're not really going to go anywhere. It's not really a tear in whole space and time. Like, it's a warping of it, but it's not really, you're not going to go through a black hole and pop out somewhere else. You're going to go into a black hole and stay in the black hole, and then eventually you'll be expelled, or the idea, conceptually, you are expelled, even though you aren't really much of you anymore because you've been broken down into such a thing. You'll be expelled as basically Hawking radiation. So again, it's not so much like a knot in space or a tie in space or anything like that, or a rip in space. It's just a big heavy thing that sucks everything into it, and then through Hawking radiation expels it out. That's like kind of saying, if I eat the turkey leg, am I going to teleport it somewhere? Well, yeah, you might be able to because it disappears in your mouth and is broken down and it might be reconstituted somewhere else. Well, no, it's not. I'm just literally eating it and then breaking it down, and then I will extrude it basically where I am. I'm not going to eat the turkey leg on Fifth Avenue and then simultaneously the turkey leg will pop up on, 32nd Street, a dozen blocks away. It's not good. No, I'm going to eat it and then I'm going to poop it out. That's basically what a black hole does. It metaphorically eats, and then poops it out via Hawking radiation. But again, I could probably find some young math students or physics students who are excited and excitable, and they heard certain things like this, and they're dealing with crazy new theories and new knowledge, and they're trying to wrap their brains around it. And then I'm asking them on the street just randomly, hey, can this happen or that happen or blah, 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 blah. They're probably going to come up with equally bullshit, dumb shit. So this idea of, oh, well, some people are more mature than others and some people are more immature, like that's a really kind of, that's very vague and kind of wonky to do. So again, where she's starting off, but again, this is not good faith. Despite his whole shtick of, I'm just trying to be good faith, just trying to have a conversation, trying to understand things. It's grifter material now.
And I think that's why this should be researched and taught through therapy, and maybe under these circumstances, people under 18 should be allowed to change their sex, and it all resumes to how they're thinking and
So if they
their
had
maturity
if
level.
they had therapy and a psychologist said this person is trapped in the wrong body, they're 12, you that's your best argument that you have.
Yeah.
What? I'm sorry. What the fuck is wrong with that? So again, she didn't say just willy-nilly. She said, again, and she even agreed, if a psychologist, after many therapy and research, much therapy, much research, much wow, after all of that, over several years or whoever knows how long, after some time, you're looking at somebody who's under 18, who we've been going through therapy, going across the board, doing all these kind of things, and then they're looking at it, and the psychologist is saying, look, this person has essentially gender dysphoria. Again, this whole born in the wrong body, again, that's a simplification that, again, these things were used as quick little analogies way back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, and now they're taking them as like absolute proof. But that's like, these things were being used by these scientists, by these advocates, as analogies, not perfect representations of what they believe, but analogies. Nobody believes that they're born in the wrong body necessarily. Again, that is analogy, that is a colloquialism. What they believe is, again, that their sex, as their biological sex and the makeup of their body, does not match up with what their gender, which gender is expression of both societal and social constructs, and how those things are both implanted on a person but also expressed. But also there are certain neurological and or biochemical kind of constructs within the brain that we have been able to research and study to some degree that does show there are some differences between what we might call a normal cisgender individual and a transgender individual. Their brain, their biological, their brain chemistry and the structures of them are slightly different. Again, I'm not going to 100% say this is 100% true, because, again, research on this is still cutting edge and it's still working on this, but there is some reason to believe that there is even some biological basis to the gender dysphoria that an individual might be experiencing. Thus, we could, again, through careful therapy and careful study, and again, lots of talking and lots of work on this, yes, if a therapist, after talking with a child, a young person, for 2-3 years, and now they're from like 12 or 13 years old, and now they're 16 or 17 years old, or whatever, say 16 years old, years of therapy, years of talking about this, years of working on different things, years of some degree of social, of trying out social transitioning and just kind of aesthetic transitioning rather than actually going through any kind of hormone replacement. And we're seeing the results of this, and they're all leading one direction, the psychologist and the, or psychiatrist, I should say, and the medical professional that might be in tandem with the psychiatrist, the doctor that might be handling some of these things, are all saying, yeah, it seems like this would work. And the kid's like, yeah, this seems like it would work. Is this so fucking radical that we might want to consider, yeah, that sounds okay? And again, if you want to say, well, that would violate the parents' rights, that's a completely different argument. Because you're not, again, you're not dealing with, or you might even be very well seceding, yes, from a pure moral, ontological, or whatever subjective kind of examination of this. This would be beneficial to the kid overall, the child, the young adult, or the young person. And they have done everything they can morally, ethically, and socially, and psychologically, and from a medical standpoint, tried all the other solutions, and they have come to a very reasonable and what we might say a morally okay and correct kind of thing. But the parent says no. Now, the parent saying no does not detract or otherwise invalidate anything else of the previous proposition, the previous statement, the previous construct. It is now a new issue of, okay, well, what takes precedent? The child's well-being or the parent's desires. Because the parent, their authority, what takes precedent? The parent's authority over their children and their right to refuse anything, and what takes precedent here? That's a separate argument. But no, we just laugh.
Okay, that was
So much for trying to present a fair, balanced, and steel man version. It even says that in the title, Peter Boghossian, Steel Man's Gender Ideology, and it falls apart. Where the fuck is the Steel Man? This ain't Steel Man. This is like fucking paper mache man.
Was from Romania, and again, you see the theme thematically. You see it come up and in it. I think you have one more or two more. One more.
Theme thematically. What theme? They're all varying different series. Like there's some kind of connection here, but like again, you set up so badly the theme because you just rambled kind of poorly about some basic like theorists and some of their ideas. But again, you didn't really describe them in a way that really ties well to this theme.
Cool.
I guess
That's
there's
you're
a
saying.
cautionary tale here that kids find a way, trans people find a way, eunuchs find a way. Just like eunuchs end up going to cutters, I ended up finding a doctor to prescribe me medroxyprogesterone. And I was like 13 or 14, you know. And this is why gender affirming care, we need it. We need it to be accessible to kids and their families so that kids like me who are experiencing these like intense dysphorias related to their bodies and their changing bodies can get safe care. Because if I really reflect on it, the care that I got, as much as I needed it, it was pretty dangerous. And providers like me, one of the reasons we share stories like this is we really want things to be safe. We really want kids to have really good assessments. We really want to walk with them through this process. And if they need things like blockers to continue working through that process, that should be available.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to.
I'm trying to figure out what the fuck is the problem with that one. That person even acknowledged that, look, there's some unsafe stuff here, and we just want this to be a safer process. More importantly, notice how they're always trying to, or it seems like they're always trying to take the most extreme form of gender affirming care and then use that to completely and utterly negate any of the utility or otherwise logical sense of all gender affirming care. Again, that individual, she was saying, I'm going to assume she, based upon those things. If she says otherwise, then I will refer to otherwise. But I'm going to assume this individual was suggesting, again, gender affirming care. Gender affirming care takes a lot of things. It can be puberty blockers. It could be surgery. It could also be just general seeing a psychiatrist. It could just be general mental health, stuff like that can help them better socially transition or not socially transition. And in fact, the gender affirming care, it can easily happen that, okay, you're questioning your gender, they're open to this, whatever, but also I have no doubt that there are some that would stop the treatment end up because they might talk to a psychiatrist and say, ultimately, I think my issues with this weren't necessarily because I didn't want to be this gender. I just had issues with some of the gender roles or gender expectations, but through this therapy and through this talking about this, I found a more comfortable way. So I'm not going to change my pronouns. I'm still going to be a she. I'm not going to transition to a he. I'm going to stay a she. And I'm not going to do a gender or puberty blockers because I'm not like, I feel like this was maybe kind of like an expression of anxiety over some other shit. So I'm going to not necessarily detransition because they never really transitioned in the first place, because gender care and gender therapy is not necessarily transitioning. It can include helping one transition from one gender to the other, but that doesn't mean it's absolutely always transitioning. A lot of times it's just assessment and therapy trying to figure out, hey, what's going on? If it's relating just specifically to some kind of gender issues, try to solve them. Maybe that's just solved through therapy. Maybe that's solved through social transitioning and getting comfortable and kind of dealing with those ideas and figuring out how to do best socially. Maybe it's just expanding the gender role for that particular individual and kind of giving them ideas and thoughts, or allowing them or otherwise helping them find ways to healthily express the gender nonconformity that they are feeling with that particular gender, or broadening it out so that they can be fine, or that they feel fine with being called he or she or whatever it is, and because they psychologically, internally, have expanded that concept to include themselves. So they don't feel any anxiety or fear or pain or whatever, or discord when somebody calls them he or she, and they themselves don't really see that because they perceive, because again of the power structures that imposed upon them, these concepts of gender roles, they have perceived what a he and she is, which does not include them. Or it might be, again, hormone blockers. It could be more intensive medical intervention, such as surgery. It could be a lot of things. But again, this limiting it down, and again, nothing about what that person was saying was at all radical, unless you are approaching this in the most bad faith perspective possible.
Thank Travis Brown for those clips. Travis, if you don't know Travis, he's a documentarian. He's right there in the back. He also travels around with us. He does some fantastic work. Thank you, Travis. Okay, so the next step is what I want to do, and this is more on you than it is on me. Come up and present. If you can do it in a single sentence, fantastic. If you can do it in a syllogism, even better. Come up and present. You got the mic. 1 sentence, 2, absolutely no more than 3, and let's see if we can do this. I know we can do this. Your best argument for why what you think I've said is incorrect.
Again, that's the problem, is that you are not a steelman at all, and this is really rough.
Well,
and you might say, well, the other people didn't join up. I'm sorry, again, with this crowd and with this kind of thing, why? Oh, to defend yourself. I'm sorry, you don't. This is just, again, this privilege is that I get to be as disrespectful and as nasty and mean as possible. But whenever I want to use you as a punching bag, or I want to use you as a target, whenever I want to talk with you, even if I want to talk seriously or whatever, you should always be accessible. Again, this is just kind of like, it's like this entitlement. This extreme entitlement, like a student who's incredibly disrespectful and shitty all the time, but then just thinks like, well, you're a teacher, like, why are you kicking me out of class? Well, because you're incredibly disrespectful and shitty. But like, you're supposed to be like a service person. Like, aren't you like believing in like the children or the future? Isn't that your moral? So why are you abandoning me and throwing me aside? Because you're being a cunt. But that just, I'm sorry, like, you take this weird maximalist approach to like, I have to be this ultimate unending charity and forgiveness and love and this perfect figure so that you can practice and have all the enjoyment of being an asshole. But then when you also don't want to be an asshole, but you want to be taken seriously, you can do both. You shake my hand with one hand and then you slap me with the other, and I'm just supposed to accept it. I'm sorry, it's bullshit. You know it's bullshit.
I was just going to make it the argument that adults should be able to do whatever they want what they want with their body because they have bodily autonomy.
Yeah, that would be my argument as well. But if I believe this, but it also extends to children.
If you believe this, okay, so adults shouldn't be able to do. And again, I could absolutely understand certain cases or whatever. But if we're speaking colloquially, why wouldn't you believe in the general colloquial sense that, yes, if you're an adult, you should be able to do whatever you want with your body to a certain degree?
Children. So that is reinforcing my position, so she agrees with me. Who's next? And make sure we get over to the gender scholars, to the actual biologists over there.
I think you've profoundly misunderstood the nature of a child, and that you've detached the reality of a child from a symbolic meaning of a child, and you're using the symbolic meaning of the child for your own purposes, and you've abandoned the reality of what a child actually is.
Nazi.
Again, fuck you. Oh, well, I'm just playing to the crowd. Yes, you're preaching to the choir. I'm sorry. This is one of the things where I might take more of an absolutist approach, is that if you are going to be and say these things, you have to make a good faith attempt at this. And those quick bullshit kind of moments, again, are immediately meant to make sure that everyone remembers, and they aren't convinced, but make sure everyone remembers everything about this perspective is bullshit. It's always to remind them, no, remember, if this starts making sense to you, I'm going to make sure to say a joke. So, oh yeah, no, this is ridiculous. Of course this is. And again, things like this. What do you mean by the reality versus the symbol right here? And more importantly, how do you know? They are dealing with the reality of the child, and there are, again, this is just kind of like, oh, the reality of they're too stupid, and they aren't developed enough to understand these concepts. It's like this. Yes, well, they are developed enough, like this idea, it's not a hard pass. They're developed enough to maybe not fully understand all things, but they might be developed enough to understand a bit. And that bit is incongruent with things. So again, the idea of therapy or dealing with this problem rather than simply glossing it over and just pretending like it doesn't exist, that doesn't work. I'm not even that much of a gender theory, queer theory, transgender theory kind of ally proponent. But goddamn, is this just lazy?
No, I'm just kidding there. I'm just kidding. No, so the idea is that people from very young ages, and we know this from self-reports, suffer from severe gender dysphoria. We know that this is true, and we know that we can alleviate this, and this has nothing to do with symbolism. This has to do with the lived experiences of those people.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the symbolism, again, this is, maybe it's just a weak way of saying like ideological, like abstract thought and symbol of the thing. Yeah, I'm not sure where you're getting with this whole symbolic thing.
And it is impossible for somebody to tell someone else that their lived experience is not correct.
Have you considered that young people, before they've had a boyfriend or a girlfriend, have no concept of a sex life?
Again, what is that? That doesn't necessarily mean relate to gender. Gender may have, again, maybe somewhat dictated like this, but again, somebody who transitions because they feel like they are the gender of, say, woman. So we got a male to female, or a male to a woman, a man to woman transgender individual. And then their sexuality comes into play, and they happen to like women, but they also themselves feel like a woman. Then they have sex with women. Oh no. Like, again, if that causes some discomfort or issue with them, then that will be addressed, and then they may detransition, or they may continue to transition and simply understand, well, okay, my gender does not dictate my sexuality and my arousal states, anything like that. It doesn't. It is not a one-to-one kind of dictation here.
Yeah, I mean, there are many people who are also asexual. There are many people who participate in different forms of sexuality, but that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they're trapped in the wrong body.
Yeah, it doesn't. It fucking doesn't. Are you going to somehow deny that homosexuality exists? I don't get it. That these are two things. They have some connection, but they are two separate things.
Hi.
Hi. So this is kind of on behalf of Jesper, who had to leave. Two-part question really quick. Number one, can you guarantee that the identity of a child will be stable in the long term? And part two, if you can't, is it okay to sacrifice some children's bodies with these interventions to benefit the kids who are stable?
Again, one, is it okay to sacrifice, again, this whole loaded language, sacrifice some children for this? Again, is it going to be stable? I don't know. And nobody knows. But also, that's kind of like saying, well, sure, you're suffering in horrible agony and pain right now, but you might not be in 10 years, so we can't do anything about it now. So I guess, it's not a stable condition. It might be a temporary suffering. I don't know. Or it could be chronic and it's forever. I don't fucking know. And we can't possibly do anything to ever intercede upon these things because it's natural and given to you by God. Or the second part, are we willing to sacrifice? Like, again, this is why the vast majority, again, only the extremists, and honestly, the extremists only exist because people like you are so extremist anti them that they end up responding in kind. But the vast majority of them say like this, no, we'll study from at least a couple of years. More often than not, you have to go through several years of therapy and discussions and talking, at least a year or two. And depending on where you are at your current life and where you are at your current maturity and developmental stages, they may encourage more therapy, more time, or other things. This is just, and again, okay, well, there might be some, like, I have no doubt, just like there are some people, again, who die from vaccines. That doesn't mean that vaccines are bad, but yes, there are always going to be some babies and some people will die from taking a vaccine. They are incredibly low numbers. They are statistically almost non-existent numbers. When taken as a whole, looking at all of it, we're talking about like less than a percent of a percent number of people will have a severe adverse effect. And then the severe adverse effect, a very, very small number of them will die from this. Does that mean we just stop all vaccines? And more importantly, you stop all investigations into these things? Because you know what? Maybe compared to what gender treatment will look like in 100 years, maybe our treatment is wrong and somewhat barbaric and risky. But we're not going to get the actual good gender treatment unless we start doing it and we continue to improve and we take that risk and we take that thing that, yes, this might not always work out 100%. But from what we have studied, the vast majority of it, it does seem to be working relatively well. Could it be improved? Sure. That's why we're still trying to do it and still trying to... We didn't just find one answer like, oh, well, this is it. We're just going to do this for the rest of existence. We're never going to investigate. We're not going to do any more studies. We're done. Again, stupid.
Okay, so the first question is, can I guarantee the identity of... How can you clap? You haven't even heard my response. Can I guarantee... Well, if somebody transitions and they say, oh, no, I've made a mistake, well, then they weren't really trans.
But then that's no.
So, no, there are no guarantees in life. There are no guarantees that when I walk out here, I won't be hit by a bus.
So then part two, are you willing to sacrifice the healthy body of some children if their identities aren't stable?
Yeah, so am I willing to sacrifice the healthy bodies of some children? I think that the experience of transitioning, even if you're not trans, might be a good learning experience for people.
Oh, fuck off. Fuck off. God damn, that deserves a slap across the face, you disingenuous fucking prick. Again, this is just really bad faith. This is kind of getting clownish.
Okay, now you can clap. We lost somebody. We're losing people with that one. Yeah, someone with the mic, yeah.
My problem with your position is, in your world, illusion and the risk for illusion doesn't exist.
The illusion and risk of illusion, I think you mean delusion, but okay. Again, the imagination of this kind of thing, but again, and it doesn't exist. One, that's what the therapy does to check for, is whether this is some kind of factor that is not relating to the gender expression, but is maybe a illusion projection and some other psychological issue that is projecting into gender. So something else could be happening. Thus, if we find that, we solve that problem. The gender problem is solved. That's why we do the therapy. And then again, this... oh, it doesn't allow for the illusion. Well, it actually literally does. It just simply acknowledges that your illusion is that the illusion of gender is always omnipresent. Like, again, it's a linguistic abstract. It's a conceptual framework. It's an idea that we create and then we put a language onto, and then we play socials to try to approximate some reality. But again, I don't know. Maybe this goes back to idealism, and this goes back to, again, this kind of like, look, this, again, it's an interesting philosophical thing, but ultimately, it's not particularly pertinent to the issue. And if it is, only in the most abstract of philosophical senses, and even then, I still think you're probably going to be wrong because you're pretty certain you don't operate under delusions, which is almost categorically wrong.
Illusion or delusion? Which did you say?
Illusion.
No, illusion certainly exists. But the fact is, in a very serious sense, we all have our lived experience, and there's no way to contravene those. So it's not that somebody is living an illusion or a life of delusion or subject to a delusion, or as Abigail Schreier and Colin and other people said, it's not that those people are subject to a contagion. It's that those people, there's no there there. There's nothing to be wrong about because itself is a construct. These are categories that have been constructed by society. So there's no that gets back to her question, there's no stable entity that one can point to. By the way, if you have a chance, I would highly recommend the wonderful paper, The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct.
That's one of his fake papers, hoax papers that he sent to a barely reputable feminist kind of he sent to a couple, and it's like, look, if you want to talk about editorial shit and how they're a bit too open to more radical ideas, that's fine from an editorial and scholarly journal thing. But again, this goes back to maybe an issue that so-called points out, but ultimately, like, yeah, great, congratulations, you're dealing with a field that is dealing with a lot of imprecise difficulties and abstract concepts, and is open to those kind of ideas. Yeah, congratulations. You're not pointing out too much there.
The average number of papers cited in the thank you, that you should clap extra for, is 0 and 1. That paper was cited some crazy number of times. Whoever has the...
Was it cited because people believed the idea, or was it cited because people are now referencing it because of the hoax?
Mike, yes, hello.
Hello. It seems to me your argument's based on external characteristics of sex. I don't think you're quite going back to the source. So I'm thinking DNA, go a bit further back.
DNA, again, DNA is the next little carnard, like, oh, XY chromosomes, stuff like that. Despite the fact that, again, even biologists and people who are not in the whole gender theory thing would, if you were to ask them, hey, how is sex based upon like your chromosomal kind of thing, they'd be kind of like this, well, kind of, but not really. And more importantly, how does that relate to like gender, just from like a biological essentialist kind of, or biological thing? Like, well, that's a fucking mess. And it's not nearly as simple, straightforward as you think it is, but whatever. Again, you're ignoring the objective thing. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't matter. All right, it doesn't really matter to the conscious experience. All right.
Arguments.
Yeah, I don't accept.
Not here.
I think that those are ersatz. I think that those are specious ways, morphology. I think that those distinctions. So listen, this is the argument. So everybody has a narrative that they buy into. When Billboard Chris and I, where's Chris? He was around here. So we were on the streets the other day, and someone was telling us that he just has his story, somebody else has their story. Your story is no better than my story. Biology is a narrative. The philosopher Derrida calls it, an incredulity toward meta-narratives.
Sorry, is he trying to cite in Derrida? What the fuck is he trying to cite there?
Their
Hold on.
Story, your story is no better than my story. Biology is a narrative. The philosopher Derrida calls it, an
Derrida. Derrida. It's not Derrida, it's Derrida. Jacques Derrida. Or Jacques Derrida. Again, the
biology is a narrative. The philosopher Derrida calls it, an incredulity toward meta-narratives.
And he doesn't call it incredulity, he doesn't call it. He presents the idea, or presents a new ideological standpoint of an incredulity towards meta-narratives. And again, the points out through deconstruction, just in general, some issues with, again, meta-narratives. None of this is particularly shocking and or radical or at all illogical when you're talking about narratives, meta narratives, and the concepts like that. None of this is at all shocking. And in most people and academics, even non-gender theorists who are gender critical, they're not going to be particularly like upset about this or like, oh my God, Derrida is so wrong, or this is so illogical and stupid. It's like, no, again, this is a shorthand little quote thing that relies on ignorance and people not knowing anything about this or anything what these people are saying in the actual context of what they're saying to realize, oh, wow, this is dishonest.
He just has his narrative. I have my narrative. There's no way to adjudicate between those two.
Not really. Again, this isn't some absolute cultural like relativism and or narrative relativism to a degree where we can't ever find truth or something like that. That's not really what Derrida or any of them, Foucault or any of those guys were necessarily saying. They were at most, one of the biggest things you could take away, and probably the strongest ones, is to be highly suspicious of these kind of claims of absolute truth from this, based upon these kind of meta-narrative and narrativological structures that themselves, like, by their essence, can't really be the truth. And more importantly, they have major issues here. Like, so this fucking ramble, this bullshit that's trying to present it as, oh, nothing is true, everything is fake. Even when they do say that, it's not necessarily that there is no value in the truth or no value in some of these things and structures and concepts or whatever. It's merely pointing out the objective fact that for a lot of them, or at least from this perspective, that a lot of them are ultimately almost illogical, that they do not have an objective existence. So they're all very subjectively created and narrated, and that doesn't mean that they can't have value according to us, but it's like value, moralities. Those are, again, things that are not necessarily objective outside of us. We could maybe make some projections on that to some degree of some objective morality, but even then, like, it's not, there's a lot of problems.
Just as good as your narrative, and we know that everything is a construct anyway. Next.
Again, that's just such a bad faith.
Professor, you seem like a very nice man. Let me just say that.
Uh-oh. We haven't been drinking together yet. No, go ahead.
Why do you and the doctors that you are friends with in the medical community even bother assigning male and female at birth? Why?
Yeah. Thank you.
Hold on.
Are friends with in the medical community even bother assigning male and female at birth? Why?
Why do they even bother assigning male and female at birth? I just, again, it's, you're taking at most this weird straw man version of them that is denying biological aspects or just there's any biological reality. When most transgender activists, whatever, like that, sex exists. We're not talking about sex. We're talking about gender. I know you have a really hard fucking time figuring that out because it is devastating to your fucking ideological narrative, but these things are different. Just stop. God, this is really bad.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Where did he go? I don't think that we should assign those categories. In fact, one of the papers that my writing partner James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and I proposed is something called pre-epistemic transgenderism, and that as people don't know what we didn't say gendered soul, as people don't know their true gender identity, if we just immediately castrate everyone from birth, subsequently they can figure out what their gender identity is and solve the problem that way. So no one would suffer genuine distress since it's all a construct anyway. Next. Where are we next?
Again, you present it kind of crazy, but part of the reason why it might actually be accepted is that from a very, very abstract, stupid way. In many ways, like, yeah, if you absolutely abolish the concept of gender, and more importantly, any of the sexual relations to this, and any kind of biological identification, then would gender dysphoria exist if there is no concept of gender that ever established, because there was never any concept of sex that existed and or gender applied to this? Or would we see simply it's rather than gender dysphoria, it's some other form of dysphoria that relates to the performative aspects of other things, that, okay, we don't have gender or sex in this imaginary race of people, or these people who there's, but something else, like a class dysphoria. Like, again, like, it's not a good idea, it's not a great argument or something like that, but it's not completely outside the bounds of fucking of conceptual reality.
Where are we next?
I think it's me.
Oh no.
And for the most part, it looks like the sponsor here, which is what's it called, Genspect, seems to be a fairly gender critical, highly anti-trans treatment, anti-gender ideology, just kind of a general reactionary bullshit organization. So yeah, that's great. Good talking. You gonna talk with Daily Stormer next there, Peter?
How are we doing on time?
So, Peter, what I'm hearing you say is that each person knows themselves and they get to define their own gender identity, because nobody knows nobody else can know anything about yourself.
Correct.
What when two people have different ideas about the categories and they have to interact? Who wins then?
So what do you mean? Like, somebody thinks that they're...
So you think you're a woman and I think you're a man. Like, which of us gets to win?
Oh, the person making the claim gets to win.
Why?
So, and again, so ultimately, this isn't a particularly good question, because it doesn't really work out too well. But like, okay, who wins? Again, treating this like a power dynamic force in many ways kind of helps to support Foucault's argument that this is all power, that there are power dynamics implied here, because you don't like the idea of somebody else's decision in having power that forces you to do something you don't like. Okay, but let's think about this just for a second. Okay, what wins? You perceive Peter as a man. Peter perceives himself as a woman. Now, here's where we get into the general idea of what tolerance is. Tolerance, if you think about tolerance, like whether it's the paradox of tolerance or tolerance just in general, tolerance implies a degree of a degree of necessary give and or movement that is allowable. That technically we wouldn't want this thing to move, but we have to have some degree of tolerances. There has to be some degree of strain that it can hold. And the big thing is that the thing that you are tolerating, by definition, you don't like, and you never will necessarily like. So I tolerate a lot of things that I absolutely dislike and despise. Now, how is that tolerance shown? Now, we can do this. Somebody gives. Now, who gives? What if nobody gives? Well, then both sides are refusing to be tolerant, and they ultimately are intolerant to each other, and we have conflict. Congratulations, welcome to the human race. But which side should give up? Whichever side can give up. Now, if we look at this, what is the cost socially and psychologically for the anti-trans individual, she, to modulate and call Peter Boghossian she, because he identifies as a woman? What is the cost to her? This is where, again, that power dynamic
again, they want to ignore this to some degree because they don't want to ignore it's that, for the most part, the general damage that is caused to them by this issue, by that, is very temporary, transitory, and ultimately very, very, very little. Whereas we could make the observation that that Peter, who wants to be known as a woman, having to give to the anti-trans, we can see, and we have effects, that this has more severe harm, psychological impact. So if we were to take this as maximizing good, minimizing harm, some kind of more utilitarian aspect or some degree like that, we might make the argument that, well, this person is more harmed than the other person by the comment. If we were to ask them to be tolerant and okay with this. Whereas the other person, if we're asking them to be tolerant and just simply be polite, then the general damage done is minimal and ultimately not that significant. Now, you may not like that because even if you agree, you might still say, well, I agree it's less, but it's still damage. Why should I have to deal with this? Well, because it's fucking life and you get bumped on the subway. Sometimes you bump into people because you are moving into the car and you have to move quickly to get into there to get through the doors. The person who gets bumped should understand that this was not 100% intentional and was simply a thing there, and thus, okay, I'm not going to respond with physical violence against you because you bumped into me, but there are some extenuating circumstances. In turn, I should also acknowledge that even though I had a perfectly legitimate reason and right, or based upon my needs, to do an action that caused the bump, I should at least be mildly polite and say, excuse me, kind of. We have these small little linguistic and social cues and gestures that we make that are ultimately not particularly worthwhile, but they do have a small little worth based upon the intent and the action that we might go, okay, well, this person clearly indicated intent was not malicious of any kind. And vice versa. Like, again, like, if I bump into them really hard and it's clear that it's hard, I might be more apologetic, or I might be accepting. Sometimes I'm the one bumping into people, and sometimes I'm the one being bumped into. Yes, there is no hard 100% certainty on this. Grow the fuck up.
Because oh no, are we doing on time? No, because I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah. Completely abandoning any attempt at trying to explain this because you don't actually know or understand this theory at all. You just don't. You only understand enough of it to mock it.
Well done. Okay. Well.
Oh, do we have? Is this on? Okay. If my daughter is dating a girl, do I have to worry about her getting pregnant? And why or why not?
I don't know. Are they having sex? Maybe, maybe not. Again, this is just this weird, close-minded bigotry, like weird sexual obsession kind of thing. Do I have to worry about them being pregnant? Is it a transgender girl? If so, I don't know, maybe. You should probably be telling them in general, no matter what their sexuality, basic sexual education. Do I have to worry about paranoids? I'm sorry. Your weird paranoia and your ugly bigotry that comes from this paranoia. I don't know. You might as well ask this. Well, if my daughter is dating a black man, do I have to worry about her being raped? Why? Well, I don't know. Like you hear about these blacks or whatever. Like it's just so crazy what they're doing in the rap. Like, oh, it's just really. I'm sorry. Fuck off. Fuck off with your weird, hateful bigotry, your absolute anything that's different or that exists outside of my fucking tiny little mind and my tiny little suburban existence. Anything that questions that, it must be bad and evil. Go fuck yourself, lady.
if your daughter is dating a girl, so you're asking me to root this in biology? Is that you trying to trick me into doing that? If your daughter is dating, they identify as girls. Do you have to worry about them getting pregnant? Are they romantically involved when you say dating? Is that a euphemism for like physical intimacy? No, don't worry about it at all. Next.
Shit. Absolute dog shit.
Why or why not? Okay. Why does she not have to worry about it? Let's see. If the girl, so let me just make sure I have this correct. If someone who self-identifies as a girl is having sex with another girl who doesn't have a penis, the other girl does not have a penis. Does the other girl have a penis? Why do I care about genitals? Can that person get pregnant?
Again, maybe, yes. Again, this whole thing, the fact again relies on this weird straw man that, again, oh, they're denying biology. They're not denying biology. This doesn't have anything to do with sex for the majority. And yes, are there some kooks? Sure, but there's also some Christians who think the world is going to end in 2026 and aliens are going to come down because Jesus was an alien. Does that mean that I get to use that as a cudgel against all of Christianity? Get fucked. I'm getting vulgar, but at the same time, why dedicate any intellectual analysis to this when they have abandoned it 100%?
I'm going to come back to you on that. Give me next. These are getting harder. These are getting more difficult. I'm being exposed as a charlatan. Okay.
Okay, my question is, should we affirm every identity of a child? So say that my 5-year-old believes that she's a horse, and
No, I just can't. We're gonna call it at that. This has been incredibly unproductive. That's 3 hours I dedicated. At this point, there is almost no utility that's going to happen here. I'm fully willing to happy to say that this was done 4 months ago. That when it comes to this topic, especially, Peter Boghossian is absolutely both anti-intellectual and pseudo-intellectual. We might examine some more of his stuff later on, but I'm fully willing to make that proclamation now. He is absolutely whatever mild criticisms that had some validity of some of the extremities of gender theory that I might even agree with to a certain degree. And I did on some of it. Some of it was a little ridiculous. Some of it is strange. I'm willing to do that. The absolutely throwing the baby out with the bathwater, complete extremism that he is displaying here, the bad faith analysis, the bad faith representation, the anti-intellectual mockery, and general dumbness of this whole talk, I am fully willing to say that he absolutely pseudo-intellectual, anti-intellectual, and anything you engage with him, no matter how much it might make sense or might comport to something that feels real, I would treat with great suspicion, and I would try to find other sources that are not him or not based in his reality that might discuss this issue further, because even when he's right, he is probably very wrong. He is absolutely oversimplifying and over straw-manning these topics. So we're going to go ahead and stop the stream right there. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for hanging out. And until next time, and as always, I hope you have a good one.